Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon. It's John Suntress with a few show notes before we get started. As always, thank you very much for listening to the commercials. I know they can be frustrating, but it helps pay the bills here at Word Balloon. Thank you greatly for doing that. It's a big way of supporting the show by just listening and being patient through a couple ads. And sometimes they repeat those ads. I have no control over that. That's from my network Spreaker, and I appreciate the fact that they've been giving me these ads to run. Also, new Word Balloon videos up, if you didn't see them already. 2 panels from C2E2. And then, unfortunately, a discussion about the coronavirus and its impact on Comic-Cons with Ithacon organizer Ed Cato. So check those out. Go to the Word Balloon channel right there on YouTube, and you'll be able to see them. Questions or comments about the show, john@wordballoon.com. You can email me there. As always, we got one more spot, and then we will get into the show. I thank you for your patience and your attention. Thank you greatly. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Nice, easy conversation with Jerry Ordway, as they usually are. You know, Jerry, a wonderful artist, whether it was All-Star Squadron with Roy Thomas or his incredible run on Superman. I don't know how many years it was in total, but he was part of the Byrne revamp of Superman, and then kept things going after Byrne left, and not only was drawing Superman, but writing Superman as well. We have a great conversation today about a lot of different subjects. Among them, we had been meaning to talk really through the end of the year about the Batman 89 comic, as it was celebrating its 30th anniversary, and we got a lot into that. How did Jack Nicholson feel about his likeness in the film? We also talk about the Joker film itself and upcoming collaborations with P. Craig Russell. We also talk about the recent Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover covers that he did to celebrate the CW Crisis. It was a product that was released in Walmart Books, and also for the direct market. He talks about the covers that he made for that. But this goes in a lot of different areas, and past runs that he had, old comic book history, and upcoming projects as well. Real fun conversation today with Jerry Ordway, talking about a lot of different things. Kind of reminds me of the same conversation I had with Dave Gibbons in terms of all the different directions that we went into. I think you're going to like it. Jerry Ordway for a couple hours sitting down and having fun. And we need a lot of fun in this current environment, don't we? On today's Word Balloon. It's all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you greatly, League, for your support via Patreon. It means a lot. You're helping to keep the lights on here at Word Balloon. And again, I keep trying to expand with more and more product. In fact, this very interview with Jerry Ordway, the stuff about the Batman 89 comic I've made into a YouTube video. It's sitting on the YouTube channel for Word Balloon right now. But this is a much longer conversation. But I thank you greatly for your support and your listening, Word Balloon listeners. Thank you very much. Patreon.com/WordBalloon if you want to subscribe, or you can click on the Patreon page by clicking on the Patreon ad on the front page of WordBalloon.com. This episode also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Great stuff coming up from Aftershock. I'm looking forward to Stephanie Phillips's Artemis and the Assassins coming this month. Just enjoyed John Layman's The Man Who Effed Up Time, and the beginnings of Zach Thompson's Undone by Blood and Guard Killers by Mark Sable to go along with other great Aftershock favorites, whether it's A Walk Through Hell from Garth Ennis and Gordon Suzuka, or Marguerite Bennett and Raphael De La Tour's Animosity, Donny Cates and Gary Brown's Baby Teeth, so many others, Dark Arc from Cullen Bunn and Juan Doe, and Dark Red from Tim Seeley, and other great books from some of my favorite people in comics, whether it's Phil Hester, Paul Jenkins, you name it. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the way to get these books either digitally or the diamond codes to order them through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. All right, let's get into it now. Fun conversation with Jerry Ordway. I think you're going to enjoy it. And, of course, as always, nice pleasantries. We were just getting started, but then we found ourselves immediately in a riff that I wanted to include. So you missed Jerry asking me how I'm doing because I didn't start the recording until I started giving him my answer. And that's where we begin this conversation with the great Jerry Ordway on today's Word Balloon. Okay, good enough,
Good. I like that. Good enough is...
Well, yeah, a DJ buddy of mine, we always would say, good enough for rock and roll. It's like close enough,
at a certain age, good enough is fine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. See, and again, given our age, you'll appreciate how much of a loser I am. I was watching, and, I got work done and had some downtime, watching a bit of Richard Pryor's Brewster's Millions movie. Remember that?
Oh, yep, with John Candy, right?
Yep. I heard an old-time radio version of it with Jack Benny from, Lux Radio Theater or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was one of those wasn't it like a 1930s movie or something that they'd remade?
I know it was a play, and I don't know.
It was a movie. Yeah,
well, it was a movie. Okay, and I don't know who was in the original movie. I've just heard the old-time radio Jack Benny version.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we wish we had. In a way, you always think about those. What would you do if you had that money?
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. But I mean, it's not a great movie. Although John Candy's funny and everything.
Yeah.
It's during Richard Pryor's grab the check period, and that's what are you going to do?
Wasn't that around? That was probably what I always think of when I think of Richard Pryor. It's weird to think about. I always think of Blazing Saddles because he was supposed to be in it, and I think he pulled out. And he was part of the writing. I think he actually helped write that screenplay.
He was one of the 4 or 5 writers on the movie. The way Mel Brooks tells it, the studio wasn't willing to insure him because they knew he was a big drug guy, and they thought he was too controversial to be the star and everything. But I got to say, Cleavon Little.
Yeah, he was good.
He was great.
I mean, he made it his part and stuff. It's just funny to think about it in relation to what could have been, because I mean, Richard Pryor, Pryor did some nice films, but a lot of, like I said, that era of making the big bucks, and you can't blame somebody for that either.
Oh, no. I understand.
Like you're suddenly given those keys to the kingdom, and you're like, hey, if someone's going to be paying me this much, sure, I'll do this, I'll do that, and
you'd think actually Brewster's Millions is a good story. And that and I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just, the fact that it's the 80s. I don't remember seeing it in the theater, but I know I saw it on cable.
Yeah. Well, you remember the movies he did with Gene Wilder.
Oh,
he did
God.
And it's funny because I think I saw something pop up on cable. I think it was the Silver Streak.
Okay.
Where it was the train one. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm a
Gene
big
Wilder's
fan of all
on the
this.
run.
Yeah.
And it's funny how politically incorrect it is.
Oh, God, yes. God, yes. Oh, my God. Seriously. No, you're right, man. No.
Nowadays, they can do so much more, but yet they can do so much less in kind of being, I guess, a little more bold,
I'm with you. No. Absolutely. Is it okay to keep all this? Because this was a great opening.
Oh, yeah.
And this is, all right, excellent. Yeah. All right, now let me say, Jerry Ordway, welcome back to Word Balloon. It's always a pleasure. You know that.
Oh, thank you.
I know. Could it be a less warm welcome? It's like I got a clipboard.
Winter.
I'm taking the census, actually, Jerry. How many
people are in the house? 2.
Okay. All right, there you go. Fine. Excellent.
That's a good way to do it. You could be the podcast census taker. You're probably more accurate.
Yeah, really. I know. Good Lord. I can only imagine what number. Apparently there's 300 people. We're done. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Great. Good job. Anyway. Yeah, I don't want to go make a left turn because we could spend 2 hours talking about that stuff. But I wanted to say, and I also wanted to understand, because I saw that great sketch that you did cover for Crisis on Infinite Earths, the tie-in to the CW TV thing.
Mm-hmm.
And was that what was that a cover to?
I did 2 of them. They did 2. DC did 2 Crisis TV tie-ins with Walmart, and then they also, I guess, because they took heat from having original content going to Walmart and not to the comic store. So the ones I did the covers for are the direct market ones. So,
oh wow,
I think they were in Walmart with George Perez, kind of reused original Crisis covers. And then like a month later, the direct market one, like the first one I did with the Arrowverse heroes and Flash and stuff, in the foreground, looking up at the Infinite Earths being destroyed or whatever. That one came out on, I think, January 15th, and I think the second one with the Anti-Monitor comes out, I think maybe towards the end of February. I don't think clearly wasn't this week, but maybe next week.
Okay.
And, but those are, they're kind of nice. Again, I think DC's been doing a lot of original content for Walmart, but I think, again, a lot of those Walmart books are hard to find, and someone goes in and buys up all 10 copies at some store and puts them on eBay for twice the cover price. Well, that doesn't give you readers. That just makes people mad.
No, you're right about that. And they finally did start releasing the Walmart stuff. Wasn't it? Yeah, it was the Walmart stuff in the direct market. Cause,
there's a couple of them each month, I think, that come out now.
Yeah, and actually, you're right. I mean, I focused on Tom King's Superman story with Kubert, and also Bendis's Nick Darrington story, the Batman story. So,
And it's funny too, because certainly, I mean, last year, actually a full year ago, around now, I did a book. I wrote and drew. I wrote two 10-page stories and drew. One of the two that I wrote I did a Wonder Woman and a Joker. I wound up drawing the Wonder Woman and writing it, and the Joker one I just wrote came out as a Target exclusive tied to the Primal Age toys that they were pushing at the time.
Yes,
I guess
of course.
I thought the Primal Age toys were really cool.
Yeah.
But, I guess they didn't quite have the market strength or whatever. But the comic was supposed to be in Target exclusively, like, in January. I didn't actually find one in the wild until somewhere in, like, maybe March, April, May even. So, it's cool that they try to do an outreach thing, but, you deal with in the case of Walmart, you're dealing with their employees or their distribution, however they stack the shelves.
Totally.
Same with the Target thing. So while it's a bigger venue, it's not a guaranteed easy find for, expanding your readership. No,
you're 100% right. I have the closest Walmart I have in the city in Chicago is a Walmart grocery store. Mm-hmm. And, I asked somebody who worked there, and this is a grocery store. I'm like, yeah, I know, but, it's supposed to be in all the Walmarts. And she's looking at me like I'm nuts. And finally shoved in the corner where they had, batteries on the wall and also baseball cards and whatever, trading cards. Right. It was over there. But, yeah, I mean, literally, not even a full shelf. I mean, it was just so in the corner, just, whatever, here it is.
Yeah.
And
I had
it's hilarious.
I had the same experience locally. I don't really, there's not a Walmart near me, so I was while I'm out and about, it's like, I'll stop in a Walmart. This is supposed to be out. And I asked people, I'd asked the employees, I looked through the store, found nothing. And, again, in the old days, it is the old days, you think about it, but there was always some kind of magazine rack in a drugstore or even a grocery store. There's a rack of magazines or there's, kind of a location where people would look for printed material where you could sometimes find comics or all the times find comics depending on, the store. So it does feel like you'd have you have to have almost like a dedicated space, which, a lot of the big retailers are probably so inundated with brands and toys and what have you that it's like, oh no, not another thing.
Or do they? And I have no idea how retail works these days. Do the manufacturers of a product or something pay even more? And I'm sure they do. Yeah. To have a dedicated shelf and display.
Well, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about in regards to because we were going to talk about the Batman the movie comic. One of the things that was part of that whole adaptation of the movie in '89 was that DC circulation guy was Matt Ragone, and Matt worked really hard to get the books on shelves in movie theaters. We created a special little cardboard stand.
Yes.
That the books, and they paid something like $5 per location to have those stands sitting on a counter.
Interesting.
And that was the way that worked. That was
Smart.
The first I'd heard of that. But it was rather than, even then, there were still some comic racks and some magazine racks in drugstores and stuff. But to have it on the counter, point of purchase, cost you $5 to put it there. So
isn't it?
That was
go on.
And then the movie thing. I know they sold a lot of copies of the comic through the movie theaters, but on top of that, the other retailers sold a lot. It was as a newsstand book for, I want to say it was maybe $4.95 or something, but it
right,
may not have been.
Wasn't it in that Dark Knight prestige format?
Yeah, well, they did two. They did one with a regular paper cover, but they were both square bound and stapled, or
right. Okay.
So there was a newsstand one, which is a line art cover that I did with the Batman kicking the Joker, and kind of like a montage cover that was done on do-a-shade board in regular comic flat separations, and that was the newsstand one. Then the other one I was doing was the other one is the painted cover was more cardboard, and that was like a bookstore, comic store thing.
With the Joker's head above Batman and everything.
Right.
Yeah, see, that's the one I remember, and as you said, I remember seeing it in bookstores as well. I don't know if I ever saw the regular floppy one, and that was still... I'm trying to think, because, 89, it would have been for me, and God, once again, let me please, just tell everybody my age and everything, but it's fine. I'm okay with it. I was out of college, or it was my last year in college. Might have been my last summer in college, but it was summer of '89. So yeah, I think I had just finished college. Maybe I wasn't buying right away, and maybe that is the only place I saw it was in the book.
Or you were maybe
broke.
Yeah, I mean that was the thing. A comic book at that time, I believe, and again, I'm going by memory, but 89, maybe they were 50 cents or 40. They could have been 50, 60 cents, something like that.
Oh, I think.
So you're talking about
they weren't $1 yet? They weren't $1 yet by 89?
I don't think so. No.
Or maybe they were. 70,
I don't remember exactly,
or
but
something.
I don't have anything sitting in front of me to look at. But
no.
But I think in they were. Yeah, it was just. It's funny though because it's just in relation when you're asking somebody to buy a movie comic. It was 64 pages. It was more of a premium. Price thing. So if you're a kid, you have a limit to your finances. So if you're regularly buying 10 other comics, how do you find the extra money to buy a new one or a different one? So it was competitive. Pretty competitive back then.
Oh, I totally believe it. And again, I mean, obviously it was a huge seller. And now, you drew it. Who wrote it? Did Denny write
Batman?
It?
Yeah, Denny adapted the Sam Hamm screenplay. And he was kind of involved with it, like, certainly for less time than Jonathan Peterson and myself. Jonathan was the editor.
Okay.
Because the movie in itself there were lots of things that were kind of rewritten while it was in production. So if we had just stuck with, the screenplay, we could have probably started drawing and working on it before we really had any kind of sense of what the movie was going to look like or whatever. But we tried to do as much as we could to stall until we had, stills and things. But even as we were getting them, we were seeing, Jonathan was like, he and I were good friends, and we both were big movie buffs, so it was a fun project in that way to kind of feel like you're on the middle of some, big blockbuster in the making. But he'd get these contact sheets and script changes from his contact at Warner Publicity, and they would often be like, "Whoa, they threw out that whole scene! Wow, they did this!" And it was kind of hard to keep up with it, because at a certain point back then you had to get comic books lettered on the actual pages that you were drawing on. So the way we would stall, in a way, like if we don't have reference for everything, we started out with Denny's script, and I know Denny did some rewrites as well as they got, the movie started changing from the time they started filming it. So the script had already had little changes, but I was able to lay it out really roughly, and then we'd place the word balloons where they were going to go on the panels, but it was really not drawn to any degree. It was just blocked in with, stick figures or something very simple, so that by the time the letterer, John Costanza, finished lettering and I got the actual boards to finish, we hoped that we would have reference for stuff, or at least have a sense of what certain, locales would look like. So, and we did have, good reference for the first part of the movie. That's where the bulk of the reference, the on-set photographer would take, beautiful shots of the sets without actors on them or whatever, and then some with while the things were being filmed. I don't even know if they do that anymore. If that's even you know what I mean?
I think they do. But I think they do, because you always get those giant coffee table movie production books these days.
Yeah.
So somebody has to be, absolutely, and that's part of that's obviously part of the marketing now. You know, or another after product and everything.
Yeah. So like with the Batman thing, there were I had at a certain point I had these film boxes that were about 8.5 by 11, about an inch thick. I must have had like 5 film boxes full of stills, like nice prints. Most of them black and white. A couple of them would be color, like if they were main scenes, but nothing. Once the movie started changing, there wasn't a lot of photographic reference for the last half of the movie, So we started getting slides, contact sheets of slides, like there would be Xeroxes of basically a contact sheet with slides, so they were all really tiny black and white photocopy.
Oh my God,
it was really hard, but you could at least see, okay, that's what's happening, but they weren't as good as for use as reference because you really weren't getting much detail of faces or whatever.
Oh yeah, no. If anything, it was just really like almost. Oh God, now I'm blanking on your guys' phrase. The breakdown, like a breakdown.
Yeah. So with the faces, I always thought it was funny that the big challenge with doing that was in a comic book, as opposed to a movie, you have a finite number of panels you can fit. So they had a page count of 64 pages, which it was full. I mean, from the original Denny script, there really wasn't a lot of extra room to move and drop and add stuff. But we kept adding stuff, so it just made more panels, But with like a shot of, say, a big sequence with the Joker and Bruce Wayne, they would mostly shoot stuff as, Bruce Wayne would get a close-up. The Joker would get a, close-up. There weren't that many shots where, like in a comic book, you need to have an over-the-shoulder shot, for example. Mm-hmm. Here's your reaction shot of Bruce Wayne, but Joker's in the foreground and you're seeing past his ear or something.
Yep.
Those are the type of, those are bread and butter for comics because you're condensing stuff. So you're taking a, 5-minute sequence and condensing it to a 1 page. You need to combine characters into panels so that both of them can talk at the same time. Whereas, like I said, movies, it's all about you're showing the actors' faces. You're generally showing them from whatever their preferred angle is as well. So you don't really get a lot of you can't do low extreme angles. There's no up the nose shot of Michael Keaton or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just not the same type of mechanics that you would use as a comic artist that you use in a movie because, a comic artist, we're making up the characters or we're drawing them. In a movie, they're paying somebody millions of dollars. So, they want them to look like themselves. They want them to look good. Maybe one guy doesn't want to be shot from the right or, you know what I mean? Everybody's got something written in their contract. So it would limit the number of angles that I had to choose from. So if I found an angle, even if it was a tiny shot of the Joker on the street, and he's walking away, if you could see a nice shot of the way, his head looked from behind, well, then, heck, I would blow that up or I would, use that reference for 5 or 10 pages whenever I need a shot because it was the only shot that I had that was good enough to use as reference. So
that's cool. Now, was Nicholson was cool with, using his likeness? I know that a few movie adaptations over the years were for comic books were killed. Yeah. Because the actor's like, I don't want that. No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here it became actually it's funny because I think probably the Star Wars and the Indiana Jones and those things probably had more of that licensing actors' likenesses and things. It probably became more of a thing because of that. So like when Batman came along, we knew we'd have to get likeness approval. And Jonathan, again, he was really smart about this. He said, there's a way to get approval. It's like a blanket approval, but you have to do an audition. And that was better than, like, say, having to submit pages to the actors, 3 or 4 different actors' representation to get them to sign off when you're really trying to meet a deadline. Because once those pages are done, they want them colored. They want them,
Yeah.
So what we did was I did a probably in February, I would say, of '89, before I really started drawing anything. I did audition pages. So I did a full sheet, 11 by 17, of multiple poses of Michael Keaton as Batman, Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne, Jack Nicholson as Jack Napier, Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and then Kim Basinger. Those were the three main ones I had to sign off.
Sure. Pat Hingle didn't give you issues about Commissioner Gordon. That's good.
No. And I actually captured him really well. If I do say
I was telling you, Brewster's Millions. Pat Hingle in Brewster's Millions. No, I love him. They didn't use him enough, and they really could have, because he's a great actor, and he's just kind of blustering around, poor man's Chief O'Hara kind of.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's a shame, man. You really got a great actor there. Damn.
Well, man. He was in like multiple ones beyond the Keaton.
Right.
I know he was still playing Commissioner Gordon in the later ones, so they definitely had a chance to give him more, more to do.
That's hilarious.
But these things went for approval, and then meanwhile I was still working on the Superman books. I was writing and drawing at that time, so it was like trying to figure out a way to get a vacation from that so I could draw 64 pages, and that wasn't an easy thing to get because. Mike Carlin didn't really want to use fill-ins. It was, not a good thing.
Yeah.
So, I wound up doing double duty.
This is like the height of your career, wouldn't you say? In terms of, man. So no, absolutely. It's like, don't mess with the secret recipe for Superman. Everything's going good right now.
Yeah. So what I was working on that stuff, and I was waiting on these approvals, and we got approved by Keaton, we got approved by Kim Basinger's representatives, and then I get the Nicholson one back, and it was just funny. Both of them, they were done, DC had photostated them, so the photostat has yellow highlight marker on areas where he didn't think it, and it says, "This does not look like me."
Ooh.
And I said to Jonathan, well, the agent's not going to say that because it's not supposed to look like the agent.
Right,
so clearly
right.
Nicholson had done this.
Wow.
So I still have, it's not like he signed it.
No, but still, that's...
Yeah, it was kind of fun. But then, again, at that point, I didn't have a lot of Joker reference. I didn't have a lot of Jack Napier stuff. It was really pretty early in the process. So all I had to work with was, I think they had a photo spread in Time Magazine or something, in maybe December or something when that first trailer had come out. So that was what I had to work with. So, by the time I'd been rejected and had to go back and fix a couple of the Joker and Jack Napier things, I was starting to get some reference. So at least had a better basis for doing it. And then we got approved, and then we didn't have to look back on it. So it was kind of a more streamlined process to do it that way. It was definitely the way to go. And I don't think they even see now. I would bet that there probably are clauses in most of the superhero actors, their contracts to allow, that use of likenesses, because they're all being digitally scanned and everything. There's got to be, more of that. But I think the issue is more of from the comic companies, that the comic companies don't have as much access as they used to. You know what I mean? I think as much as it's probably got closer as far as the company, Disney, Marvel, DC, Warner, the film companies are much more secretive.
Yes. Well, absolutely. No, you're right. The entire production process. My buddy Rob Burnett, who has a YouTube show, he got access to the Dune script that's in production, and Warner made him yank it down, and there was nothing negative said about it. He is really excited for it, and I never saw the video, so I have no idea. But yeah, Warner got it knocked down on YouTube, and the only complaint was, well, he's commenting on it, and it's okay. And again, like you said, no, everybody's very secret. And also, someone ought to do a history of that era of movie adaptations in the comics, because there's a lot of interesting creators on there, and I mean, God, as you know, right? Walt Simonson, didn't he do Aliens?
Yeah, Walt and Archie Goodwin did Aliens through Heavy Metal, through the those guys, and
that's right.
And then Steranko did Outland.
Yes, Jesus.
And I'm trying to remember, you had Al Williamson doing the Star Wars I think he did The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
And he did the De Laurentiis Flash Gordon. That is a ton better. And again, isn't it funny, Jerry? I don't know how you feel about the movie, but it seems like when I saw it, I was disappointed. But people younger than us, they were kids, and so of course they love it. They love that.
Well, they're looking at it. I mean, I guess you can also come into it with less expectation of it being close to anything because they never read a Flash Gordon comic.
True.
You know what I mean?
Probably didn't see the Buster Crabbe stuff and everything.
Right, right. So, I mean, I think that frees you up to accept it being campy or crazy or whatever. And if you watch it from that perspective, it's kind of definitely kind of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it recently, but it
is fun. I agree with you. No.
It's
it is
fun.
Well,
it's
very. You got to take it that way. Absolutely, man. And Sam's such a good guy. And I mean, and also Timothy Dalton. Good. I mean, that's probably the first time I ever was aware of Timothy Dalton's work.
Yeah.
And I mean, everything that progressed. I always say he's so vastly underrated, and especially as he matured, like the character he played in that Looney Tunes Back in Action with Brendan Fraser. It's like that's the James Bond Timothy Dalton that I want to see because as he got older, it's like. No, that's even more like the books in my mind's eye.
Well, he was. I don't know if you watched the show Chuck, but he was on Chuck as a reoccurring villain, and he was very, very good. But
no, I didn't see. I've watched Chuck in and out, and it really once it got streaming, I really went back and watched even more of it, and I forgot how much I enjoyed it and everything. So
that's a fun show.
That's great.
They pulled in a lot of different actors who were known for other franchises. I think that was always the kind of the fun part about that show too. Was that like grabbing guys? They were kind of the first ones to do it. I think that you'd grab somebody who was remembered from some James Bond, like with Timothy Dalton, and then making him the evil mastermind or a spy or something. But they even used Linda Hamilton. I think as Chuck's mother.
Yeah, she was Chuck's mom. Well, and Scott Bakula was Chuck's dad, and
right.
And Chevy Chase played that kind of Steve Jobs kind of or Bill Gates kind of bad guy. No, it was. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I tell a lot of friends. I'm like, if you haven't ever seen Chuck, totally worth seeing. And and everybody, God, and really, it's just a fun, hilarious show. But Amanda Sante, I know, was on there, and. I mean that's so. It's interesting that I missed the Dalton episodes, but no, I totally agree with you about Chuck. That's
Dalton was great in Penny. Dalton was great in Penny Dreadful. That was a great part for Dalton. That was. Did you watch Penny Dreadful?
I have not, and I hear nothing but amazing things about it.
Yeah,
I love to. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's a really interesting, fresh take for all the effort that Universal's tried to put into relaunching their, monster franchises and stuff. Penny Dreadful basically did that in that show. There's a Frankenstein. There's they had Dracula. They had all the kind of classics. Trying to done. It was just done really well. It was done in a period form. They even had the werewolf. I mean, it was just it's really good. You watch that. I guarantee you watch the first season, you'll be hooked.
Okay. All right. I understand and everything. I was going to say about the old classic movie specials and stuff. Of course, Kirby in 2001.
Yep. Well,
and also the series after that.
Yep. Well, he spun outright, and he spun Machine Man was Mr. Machine. Came out of the 2001.
That's right. Yes,
comic.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I just actually I went through. I was trying. Somebody had at my local comic store. I had. Was talking to a guy who was like trying to figure out if they had bags for the Treasury editions, and I said somebody must have them. So the guy wound up buying them, but he had to buy like 100. And I said, hey, I'll split it with you. I'll buy some of those. So I was going through all my Treasury editions, and I was kind of as I was putting them in these bags, I was going, I sat down, of course, like you're suddenly 10 years old again. I'm sitting on the floor reading the 2001, and then I'm going, oh look, here's the Wizard of Oz. Treasuries that Marvel did with John Buscema, writing Roy Thomas had adapted them or whatever. There was the Joe Kubert, the Bible. There was just a bunch of
yes, Jesus.
And I was surprised at how many I had. I was like, Whoa.
Well, I'm impressed. Yeah, man, because I have a handful, and buying them back over the years, and a lot of them are just reader copy quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love them. I mean, yeah, they were great. And I remember the very first one I got, my father bought for me on our summer vacation, and it was that white covered Shazam collection, Captain Marvel. Yeah. And I had never heard of Captain Marvel, and it's like, oh, Captain Marvel, I used to read that when I was a kid. You should check this out. I'm like, all right. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. So, and again, I was like 10, so I was the perfect age to read the old Captain Marvel stuff. And
that was, for me, I think it had to be early 70s when Marvel started expanding. They were basically, I guess everybody was trying to eat up space on the newsstand. So Marvel expanded, then DC expanded. DC did, all their books went to 25 cents, and they reprinted all this 1940s stuff for the first time. There was a ton of stuff that I'd never seen, that to me I was thinking about how influential it was because, for example, I was a big Marvel fan, but in the back of all the Kirby books, the 25-cent Kirby books, they're reprinting like the Boy Commandos, and they're reprinting Newsboy Legion, and all the Kirby stuff from the 40s, Simon and Kirby from the 40s.
Yeah.
That I didn't even really have a sense of because I was such a Marvel maniac. So that was like a good, for me, that was almost like training for a couple of years later when I was doing All-Star Squadron, because I then at least had a familiarity with that era and with, the characters like Shining Knight, and it's like, oh my God, Shining Knight. There was Frank Frazetta drew some, like a handful of Shining Knight stories, but then you had really good, Mort Meskin drawing the Vigilante and Wildcat, and there's all these just really great little pockets. Joe Kubert on Hawkman, of course, even though he was a young kid, they had a lot of energy to them.
Absolutely.
So it was like for a guy who was too young for that. I mean, in the 70s, I was born in 1957, so my comic book knowledge really started from say 67 on. As far as that, so I missed all this other stuff, but I was able to read it because you'd buy a regular copy of, Batman. Well, there was reprints from the 50s in the back of that. That was just a great era,
No,
again, it's kind of like when you talk to kids, like my kids growing up they never really had an appreciation for anything old because everything new was at their fingertips.
Exactly.
And I would tell them, I say, like, when I was a kid, again, it's not like I had to walk through snow, 10 feet deep or whatever. But it's like when we were kids, there wasn't a million channels. There was no dedicated kids channel.
Right.
All you had was UHF channels, which showed old movies. Right. And if there was less on and you wanted to watch something, well, then you'd have to go, I'll see what this is about. And, I was then exposed to tons of great old films, some of which I haven't seen in 40 years, because they're either lost or they were on a, TV station's 16 millimeter or something,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, I wouldn't have chosen this purposely, but because of the limitations of what else was available,
Right.
I was exposed to something that was great that kind of fostered a lifelong interest in old movies and. But again, now there's a channel dedicated to everybody.
Right. Well, now there's Turner, and I always laugh at that too because you're right. I saw those same black and white movies. I'm 7 years younger than you, and I, so born in '64, and my stuff was really the early 70s is my most, vivid, aware youngest time. And it was the same way, man. No, it was, and I, like you said, I wouldn't have watched the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies, but that was the only thing on it. And then it's like, oh my God, these are great. And I mean, that's a good example. But like you said, even the lower UHF channels, good Lord, like the Bowery Boys might be the best movie they show. That day.
Well, you had an appreciation for that, just like, you could certainly. I would always put the Three Stooges above them, but they were entertaining. You had I was in Milwaukee, so up until the time that we got cable, and I think I was already working at for DC. Probably like 1980 is when we got our first had cable in our area.
82 for us, but go on.
Yeah. So once that happened, and I was working at home, hey, I was consuming a lot of TV, and I suddenly said, like, here's WGN in Chicago. Well, WGN had those old movies on late at night, and Turner, Turner had his TBS, and they ran old movies. And,
John Wayne would be on TBS, absolutely.
New York had WPIX, and it was just those, the old strong broadcast stations that would never reach, say, Milwaukee.
Right.
But we had three, like I said, we had three UHF, pretty much 2 or 3 UHF channels, and Channel 18 in Milwaukee ran all the old movies. I got to see tons of stuff that affected me deeply, scared the hell out of me as a kid, like the original Mummy, Island of Lost Souls, which was the Dr. Moreau story.
Yeah, Charles Lawton, amazing.
Creepiest movie, and that thing has only gotten creepier as every couple of years somebody finds more footage that had been cut from the original release.
Right, yes.
And it's like, oh my God, this thing was worse than
I'm sure when you saw Freaks for the first time, how jarring that was.
I remember was a Devil Doll or something. There was one that I think was Lionel Barrymore where he shrank people down.
Oh, I've never seen that one. I'm aware of that. When you said Devil Doll, I was thinking of, wasn't it in the 70s, one of the horror anthologies, in black and everything? Yeah, and then they did a story kind of like that. I think they did a couple of those on the Twilight Zones, too. But that's true. And, of course, one of my favorites with Telly Savalas, with some hair, talking Tina, of course. The little infant doll that is, classic kid toy and stuff. And my name's, and I believe it was June Foray.
Yeah, that was a creepy one. See, I watched those. I mean, I remember my brother Joel was like 2 years older than me. But he and I would watch the Twilight Zones on Friday night.
Sure.
And my mom had a tavern, and her bar closed at 8. So she was open from, she had like it was really like the Bibbo's bar. I mean, she was open from, I think, 7:30 in the morning.
Yes, you're talking about this. That's awesome. Go on. Yes.
Yeah, she was
like 7 in the morning?
Like 7:30 in the morning till like 8 at night. And it was mostly old retirees and people who worked in the neighborhood, like machine shop or whatever. That people would come in after work.
Third shift people, exactly. Like they're done at 6 in the morning, so they need somewhere to go.
So we generally had to wait till after she closed to eat dinner. So 8 o'clock, so generally anything on TV, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, hey, we were watching it. And then, later we would, I think we got to stay up till 9 or something. I just remember that being a big thing. And there were like a couple shows that she would I remember letting me watch with her. One was The Fugitive, which she really liked David Jansen.
Of course.
And then I remember watching Ephraim Zimbalist in the FBI.
Absolutely, man. Sunday nights, I remember that. That's hilarious.
And my aunt was a big fan of Perry Mason.
Yes,
and
yes.
I used to, as a little kid, watch that, and it felt like the guy who was the defense attorney, was Hamilton Berger or something. Yeah. And he just, like, the actor himself projected such a creepy quality that I always thought that he was the bad guy, like he was really evil or something.
Sure.
Because I was really little.
Yeah. Well, he was kind of the adversary, obviously.
Well, he was the adversary, but it's just funny thinking about it when you grow up and you go, wait, he was defending, he was the prosecutor and Perry Mason was defending murderers. It's like, wait, who is the bad guy?
Dana Gould, the comedian, I know recently was on a serious Perry Mason jack. And the great thing, and all the procedurals are great this way, you see so many actors when they're babies.
Oh, yeah.
And these are their first things. Last weekend, the Decades Digital Channel ran all weekend long the first 2 seasons of Love American Style. So it's 1970 and 71. And it's so funny because literally Saturday night I see an episode and then Sunday I'm watching the Oscars. And Diane Keaton was on an episode.
Oh, that's funny.
And literally could not even recognize her. And it's still like 3 years before she did Sleeper, I want to say, with Woody Allen.
Right.
And she looks very fresh-faced and obviously shot differently for TV than the movies. Because, outside of her voice, did not recognize her. And then Sunday night, you see her on the Oscars with Keanu, and I'm just like, oh, my God.
Well, think
and again,
how many...
I love Diane Keaton. Decades later, I still love Diane Keaton. She's amazing. But, I love... But, Perry Mason, oh, God. Tons of... Commissioner Gordon's I know on an episode of Perry Mason.
Well, but the thing that's funny is in those old shows, it was like you had different character actors who worked for different studios, so they would show up in all that studio shows. Like Universal had, you'd see the same familiar faces in, supporting roles in all of the Universal shows. Yep. You would see the same guys in the
shows,
like ABC or I'm trying to think of the name of the studio that would Screen Gems. I think was a lot of ABC shows, but that was kind of a cool thing because you would be if you watched. Universal made all the not dopey, but like they did Columbo, they did Rockford Files and all this. So there would be those same actors like churning through all these shows.
No, you're right. It's kind of the last vestiges of the old movie studio system.
Yeah.
But definitely. And a great universal example of that is the guy from The $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman, Richard Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
Oscar Goldman. And, oh, my God. And I got to meet him at San Diego before he passed away, and he was so cool. And I wish I had interviewed him then and I just talked to him at the booth he was signing at. Yeah. But I remember me and Cary Grant making a movie back in '54, and it's like, yeah, of course you do. And he worked with everybody, and like you said, good Lord, in the '60s, and especially like on The Fugitive, he was The Fugitive's brother-in-law.
Oh yeah, well he was Charlton Heston's. I think he married into the. I want to say.
Oh wow!
That he married his. Somehow he was so involved. Somehow, like either a sister or a daughter or something. Not a daughter, maybe. I don't know. He was in that grouping too. And I think you realize that there's connections. That, like you're saying, when you see movies from the '50s and you go, "Oh, look, I recognize there's Robert Wagner," or there's. It's just funny how that's how, like it used to be with comics. In comic books, is that you would have the same faces. Like there's probably the same casting directors working for Universal for all those shows. It wasn't like they were churning new casting directors every couple of years. So these people had long-time histories with people. They could immediately go, that's that guy. Here's the script. Oh, you need this guy, this type of guy. Here's, Joe Blow.
Yep.
In comics, it used to be like that when you had people who were there for long periods of time. They knew everybody. They could assess we need somebody to fill in on Superman. Oh, grab him because he did this, or he's, he can do the deadline in 2 weeks or whatever. I don't know that exists in any historical fashion nowadays.
As far as comics go,
yeah,
I don't know.
But that's why I think even with the actors, a lot of those people probably had long, memorable. Maybe they weren't making millions of dollars, but they were making. Good, probably upper middle class money throughout that whole period because they were working every week,
Yes, absolutely. Well, and even maybe, 2 or 3 shows the same week where, I'm doing Emergency on Tuesday and I'm doing Adam 12 on Thursday and whatever. I mean, all those shows. Yeah, and and I really want to read a good history of specifically Universal from that period as well.
Yeah.
Because, they were like the last ones. And also, they had tons of wardrobe. They had tons of stock footage.
Yep.
So you could really construct a show, because again, they still had all their movie legacy.
Yep.
And we're just shitting out television shows.
Well, I was thinking
50s,
about the aspect of having the giant prop departments, the giant wardrobe departments, how valuable that was. I mean, it probably lent a little, generic quality to a degree, but what a great, amount of support for whatever you wanted to do. If they wanted to do a costume drama, hey, we've got costumes from whatever movie that we spent a lot of money on in the 50s. You got your king, you got your queen, you got your guys in armor. They could do that on, like we watch. You probably watch too, like the dopey shows like the Time Tunnel or whatever.
Of course,
any kind of time travel. Like suddenly, hey, 1 week they need. Cavemen. The next week they need cowboys, and the next week they need, knights in armor or something. It was all at their beck and call. Plus, they, like you said, they could also rely on stock footage.
They would use, like you said, I believe Time Tunnel was all 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like they had decades of props and costumes and everything. Did you see this documentary? Just a couple of years ago, and Gabe Hardman, the artist, is in it as one of the talking heads. Mm-hmm. It was about this couple, and they were storyboard artists and other, very important jobs in Hollywood and everything. But support people, production people, and the wife went to work on the Fox lot and was in, I want to say, like the art department or the photo reference department and stuff, and they were going to get rid of it.
Oh, yeah.
And thank God they went to the Motion Picture Association, and they're like, "We'll take it over. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, thank God, because literally they had production notes going back to and although I think he was at Warner Brothers, but think of the Edward G. Robinson era, making a gangster movie and making it authentic and stuff like that.
Well, there was just I just saw, I don't know if this related to that, but I just saw a story about, I don't remember, somewhere online I looked it up. It was about the beginnings of Fox Studios, and they were, in the article itself, they were talking about how a lot of this history was almost lost, and maybe that's the same thing you're talking about, because it related to the original, the guy who originally started Fox, who was, apparently pretty progressive and forward-thinking for the 1920s, but that he got kind of forced out in the 30s at some point by, I guess, taking on a partner, and then the partner forced him out, and it became 20th Century Fox or whatever.
Right.
But he said all this history was in boxes that were about to be destroyed. So maybe that just happens a lot because it's all paper, It's somebody else's history. But it does seem like an archive that should exist somewhere,
Well, of
that
course.
should have.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And turning it back to comics, that's why I always point to Amazing Heroes, of course, the Comics Journal, David Anthony Kraft's Comics Interviews magazine, all that stuff. I'm sure you read it as well. Well, you were already a pro. Were you reading it when you were a pro? Were you reading those magazines?
Yeah, I think I bought Amazing Heroes every, whatever it was, monthly or something.
Yeah, it was monthly.
I remember that.
Yeah,
and I bought the Comics Journal generally if they were interviewing somebody I was interested in, because they did the big long-form interviews.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. Now obviously, really probably starting in the late 90s and on, every moment is recorded. So it's easy. But really, I always say the 20th century is this last period where there are some little gaps here and there, and especially even in the comic business. And it's like, let's hang on to that stuff because, they were the ones that talked to Hal Foster before he died about Prince Valiant and some of the great comic book history. Because also, and it drives me crazy when I hear a podcast, and hey, I do it too, where we make mistakes and stuff, and get something wrong. But even sometimes when it goes a step further, and there's just this mythology that the podcaster seems to have about things. And I remember hearing a podcast, and they're like, Bill Everett, it was such a shame he only did that one issue of Daredevil, and that was it. And it's like, no, there was another 10 years of his career, and of course, saying that the Daredevil issue was the last thing he did.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
No,
Everett, he kept going.
I mean, it's interesting to think about this. I think of Everett a lot because he did, he created Submariner, which is an iconic early comic book creation, still around, very important to the Marvel continuity and stuff. Marvel seemed to, and there was a really good issue of Alter Ego that was devoted to him a couple of years ago, and it was kind of interesting because as I was reading this, you got the impression that because he came from a wealthy family, he came from a well-to-do family, and he was clearly an alcoholic, and he'd have times where he was totally unreliable, fall off the map. But you know what? The companies always gave him work, and he got to do Submariner work in the 70s, 60s, 70s, even into towards the end. I mean, he still got that work.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, in this interview or with in Alter Ego, it indicated that maybe he got a little bit of a preferential treatment, not so much that he created Submariner, but he came from a good family, like a well-known, like that had that status or whatever had some impact on it. So I'm reading that article and I'm thinking to myself, okay, you have other people who have had really kind of horrible ends, who also succumbed to alcohol, and just basically, died kind of in obscurity or working as night guards or some menial job that doesn't befit their talents.
Yes.
Reed Crandall was one that comes to mind. I think there's plenty of guys like that, plenty of people like that in the comics industry. And it was just interesting that jumped out at me, was like that Bill Everett, hey, you could create a superhero that was high impact and everything, but how much are companies going to keep remembering that? Well, Marvel did well by him. Maybe he didn't make millions, but every time he came out, somebody gave him another project, which was cool. And he contributed. He did beautiful work up until the end.
Yes.
But how much of that is like Wally Wood? Did Wally Wood get that? No, Wally Wood was just unreliable, and he was an alcoholic. It's kind of a shame because it really wasn't necessarily about the talent. It was the fact that, maybe that class kind of aspect was in play. Same thing was true, I think, when you read about, like, any Stan Lee comments were always funny about George Tuska. Now, George Tuska had a great career, many highs and, not a lot of lows. He seemed to be steadily employed up until he retired. But Stan Lee was impressed because this guy was a good-looking guy, and he was, like, really tall. It's interesting how some of that stuff, obviously he still had to do good work, and he still had to make deadlines and all this.
And he did.
But it's just funny how certain aspects, maybe these guys would project onto somebody. You know what I mean? Like maybe Stan respected the fact that this guy was, a strapping, handsome, and Will Everett was from a storied New York family or Massachusetts family or whatever it was. There's a certain other aspect that somehow comes to play, which I guess we all do.
Yeah, man, I think so. I think that happens in life. The good-looking people, they get preference. There's that subconscious thing. I don't even think it's even intentional. It's just, again, this is in the back of our minds. We've been programmed this way.
Yeah, well, it's the. I think they just play with it really well on The Simpsons. One of my favorite shows, Simpsons. But it's the, Mr. Burns is, who is that dynamic young go-getter or whatever. One episode it's Homer, the next episode is who is this guy?
Right. Oh yeah, Cincinnati. Yes.
But I always like the concept of the dynamic, go-getter. So, but we do. We certainly project that type of thing into even actors that we like or we don't like or whatever.
Sure.
So, when you see movie casting or you see something, you think, well, I don't see that person at all because, again, that looping it back to Michael Keaton, there was a huge furor at the time over Keaton as Batman because Keaton had basically just been Beetlejuice or he'd been,
Mr. Mom.
Right. So,
just wacky comedian, Night Shift and Mr. Mom, and it's just wise.
You have to show them. You have to show them a role that breaks that, and that's probably hard for an actor once they get into that little typecast, that little box. But Keaton had done Clean and Sober, and that came out before Batman. And that was clearly like a more dramatic role. It was like, okay, this guy's got chops, No,
you're right about that. Well, and also, and I know this comparison's been made before, comparing today's social media outrage over casting or whatever, and all we had back then were the letter pages of Alter Ego and Amazing Heroes and all the old magazines and stuff. And I remember reading that stuff. And also the dream casting of, oh man, if they ever did Dark Knight Returns as a movie, they got to get Clint Eastwood, and he would be perfect at 60. He would have been perfect at 60-year-old Batman. Right. So it's I love. I remember that, and of course, like you said, it's it does. It takes you got it. Sometimes you have to trust the casting guys. Yeah. Well, who would have thought Chris Pratt would be first of all, who would have thought about a Star-Lord movie? Right. And then Chris Pratt being a great action hero. Right. And all we knew him from was Parks and Rec and 5-year engagement and everything. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny though too because you in a case like that, it clearly starts with the script. As much as the actor brings to it, somebody, the casting person, the director, whatever, they had a script, and the script had to have been written in a way indicated this character is not your conventional,
Sure.
perfect superhero guy. So I think that's where you start looking at, hey, this guy was good in comedy. He's got kind of a light touch. He'd be great in this. So you wind up then tailoring, maybe after he's cast, you tailor some stuff directly to his irreverence or what have you, and then you've got something, But yeah, if it was a more noteworthy role, then people would have had more time to, be up in arms over it, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. I like Paul Rudd as Scott Lang.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's funny because, I remember that initial Marvel premiere where Scott Lang debuted because I've always loved Ant-Man's original comic book uniform.
Yeah.
And it was this great shot of, the classic uniform and, some giant man, obviously. And I was like, oh, this is great. But, yeah, the last thing in the world, I thought of was Paul Rudd. Obviously, even, down to the hair color. I think his hair was, red or orange or whatever in the comics.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so it was fun. It's like, oh, no, he's great. He's perfect. So, and again, leaning into his strengths and enough of a blank slate that people can accept it. What do you think of Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange?
I like him. I don't know if you heard the original guy that they were after.
No.
Was Joaquin Phoenix. At the time when that was first being cast, he was
weird.
He was kind of
I don't think so.
I think it would have been a different thing.
Oh yeah.
But I was thinking about this week pretty historic that Joaquin Phoenix wins an Oscar for the Joker.
Yes.
It's kind of a little bit mind-boggling, but I think well-deserved. It was really, if you saw the movie, it's a great performance, and it's, clearly someone having to basically starve themselves down to skin and bones is something that most people can relate to.
No, I'm with you on that, and he acted the hell out of it. But I'll be honest here, I was pretty candid about this when the movie came out. I think I've read too many Batman Joker stories, and I couldn't help but be influenced by that. So that was on the comic book side of the movie that I felt like there was too much Batman mythos in there. But also, again, us being old movie buffs, I keep saying, and no disrespect meant to Todd Phillips, because for a guy to make a movie like that and the Hangover movies and the G.G. Allen documentary about gross G.G. Allen from the 80s and stuff, I'm like, this guy's a hell of a filmmaker. That said, it really rang the Scorsese bell so hard that I'm like, this is like seeing a great cover band do an amazing version of a song, and a good portion of the audience having no idea what the original even sounded like.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally get that. I don't think that was. That didn't bother me. I think the fact that it was an alternate take was fine. I think I would have had a harder time maybe having it be more integrated into the DC continuity, so to speak.
You would have wanted it to be more?
No, I think I would have. I liked it better as an isolated thing because
I agree.
It is an Elseworld,
Yes, absolutely.
But what I liked about it, and again, Mitch Halleck and I, had gone to see the thing. I think we got to somehow he got us in on a Wednesday night for some reason, but. It was just funny at the very end of that. He looked at me and he goes, "Well, it was well made, but man, I don't think I ever want to see that again." And I was like, "I don't know." And we had this long discussion about whether it had any appeal to young kids, And I said,
Sure.
I actually think it's hitting the right political vibe.
Yes.
And I, before that movie came out, there were all kinds of stories about it's from the time it started getting previewed. I think. People were, I don't know who, but there were media stories about how this could be a dangerous film. And, and you know what? When you see it, it makes you realize that dangerous to the media, meaning not necessarily individuals, but maybe the media companies, is changing or shaking the status quo. And the status quo is the status quo for a reason. It's protected, no major changes. That movie pretty much... by the end of it, is asking for rioting and
revolution.
And that's something that is uncomfortable. Maybe if you're a company that owns Starbucks or you know what I mean.
Yes,
it's uncomfortable. But I grew up in the '60s. I mean,
right.
I was a kid in the '60s,
right.
and there was a lot of social upheaval. And I can't look back on that social upheaval and say that was wrong. I think that was absolutely right, and it was right for the time because of how the 50s had led into the 60s.
Agreed.
It made us question things. And
absolutely.
I think, so it's totally in the moment, and that's why I think there was an appeal to young people, and maybe they just thought it was cool to see somebody because it was pretty violent.
Yes.
But it wasn't. That was the other thing that Mitch and I talked about was that the violence was contained. And it was more minimal up until the end. But when it happened, it was really shocking. It was like you just went, whoa, as opposed to a movie where a guy's spraying a machine gun and killing 85, commandos or whatever, where you don't know any of those commandos. You don't have there's no empathy for that. You know what I mean? It's like it kind of, that like is totally desensitizing yourself to the violence.
Right.
So it was very effective in that way, and that actually impressed me. I mean, the first gunshot was like, whoa, and that's how it should be in a way. I mean, I think it was the antidote, at least within that little film, to this a whole genre, which is about, again, maybe that springs out of video games or whatever, or it, is a reaction. 20 years of people fighting in Afghanistan or something, you know what I mean? There's definitely a militarization feeling in video games, in, adults, actually more adult video games, all gun stuff.
Sure.
It's a weird thing because it does desensitize you. I don't think it would, and the point of the Joker is it's not going to desensitize you if you see it happening in front of you. You know what I mean? And we generally don't get to see somebody get shot in front of us. So I think that was kind of to me, that was my takeaway was like, well, this is actually very powerful to remind you that, yeah, this is bad news. If you got shot, if you're on the street and the car drives by and somebody's going for somebody else and you take a couple of bullets, it doesn't matter if you got a couple of bullets in you and maybe you don't die from it. That's going to affect you for the rest of your life. That's what violence is about. And I think we're at a point where we really have kind of desensitized because there's school shootings and there's all these other things that are pretty horrific and we don't know how to stop them, or we at least, people will say they don't know how to stop them. And it seems to be more of an education issue, I mean, you can argue all the other political points, but to me, it feels like people really have, not to be generalizing, but a lot of people have kind of lost that sense of shock over stuff like that because they feel inundated. There's always some bad news, and the world is a smaller place because the media is showing you stuff happening everywhere. But it's really almost like a construct of the media because the media sells more. They get more clicks or whatever it is with bad news than they are going to get with good news.
Sure.
So, that can overwhelm you. I mean, I totally sympathize with people who feel that overwhelming depression from the state of things. But when we were kids, but 15, 20 years ago, you'd really feel empathy because New Orleans is flooded or whatever.
Right.
And you would feel it. Now it's like, 25 inches of water in Houston or Louisiana or something, and you go, it's just another news day. So
or the ravaging of Puerto Rico.
Yeah,
and it's like, yeah, all right, fine, but that was last month's news. Right now, we're really focused on the impeachment. Leave us alone.
Yeah,
I that's what I think is the disposable presentation. Flint, Michigan's water crisis is still absolutely happening. And when's the last time you heard about it?
Yeah.
Just stuff like that. And I agree with that. Now, and it's interesting, though, because I would say, and Joker impacted, I came out of that like you and Mitch and felt a bit like Mitch, and I think Mitch and I even had this conversation. I'm like, I don't know if I want to see it again either. And then yet I realized that movie haunted me for like several weeks afterwards. And I'm like, I must have subconsciously liked it in an art appreciation way more than I initially gave it credit.
Yeah.
So then I had a bunch of conversations on this podcast with various people that have, worked on the Joker or whatever. And it's like, what did you think? And I'm glad we're talking about this.
Yeah.
And I would say actually that what you described to me didn't come as much from the Joker movie, but more like the Matrix movies where you would gun down people and it really was this desensitized moment. Right. I almost think the politics of Joker is what did elevate it from where we are with other, even the direct video game adaptations that are out there, like Max Payne and some of these other movies that have been Hitman, all these other movies over the years and stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. But again, I agree with you. Joaquin Phoenix, absolutely deserving. Isn't it interesting that the two Oscar-winning comic book performances revolve around the Joker?
Yeah.
And
they were both pretty dynamic takes on the character, which is interesting. Well, you mentioning even about the King of Comedy or the Taxi Driver as far as
Taxi Driver. Yep, both of
leaning
those,
on or whatever. But I always think of Dark Knight, and Christopher Nolan admits his indebtedness to Michael Mann movies like Heat.
Oh wow! Well, sure, Heat. Now that you say that, absolutely, yes.
So I think, I know, like Mitch had said, he watched Taxi Driver and he was like, holy crap, they did a lot of shot-for-shot stuff.
Oh, God.
And I know they did, or I assume they did. Taxi Driver was a movie that I watched. I went to the theater to see when it came out, right when it came out, but after it had gotten some acclaim and all that. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really disturbing. And that was a movie I actually never went back to. Not that I saw it once. And
I haven't either.
This is heavy duty. It was just uncomfortable,
I didn't see it till the 80s, and it was at the Chicago Film Festival, and or it was at one of our art house theaters, and they were, bringing it back, 10th anniversary, something like that. And it's an incredible film, but no, I felt the same way in terms of, I don't need to see this again. It is so brutal. But it was incredibly realistic, and the performances are amazing. And also just even the little things of, oh, God, there's Albert Brooks. Oh, God, there's 13-year-old Jodie Foster. Oh, God, there's Ira Keitel with really long hair.
Well, you know what? Generally speaking, I'm not a big nihilistic movie fan.
Neither am I.
And I was thinking about this because, if there's a case like even when you see a movie like Raging Bull, which is about a guy who just can't make the right choices.
Love that movie.
It's kind of distressing to watch somebody go through their life, at each step making mistakes. I don't like everything to have a perfect happy ending, but I think some of those type of performances, and in Joker is certainly one of those. It's overwhelmingly kind of sad to watch a character have basically a downward spiral,
Sure.
And that was the case certainly with the Taxi Driver as well. And the social commentary in some respects in a lot of these movies you can read into, and maybe everybody doesn't come away with the exact same, analysis of it. But the fact that they make you think about stuff is a plus, because a lot of movies, I watch stuff on Netflix or whatever, and the next day it's like, what did I watch? And it wasn't even something that was bad.
Yes.
It was something that was kind of decent, but not great.
Right.
And it just immediately flies out of my head, and I think about that. It's like some stuff that you're a little bit disturbed by is stuff that you keep rolling through your head and you keep thinking about. A lot of times it's the same with music. Like I hear a song and I go, I don't know if I like that. It kind of bothers me. And then eventually it's like, wow, that's my favorite song,
Funny.
As opposed to something that you hear once and you immediately love, and then you're tired of by the time you've heard it the fifth time.
Yeah, bubblegum. This is the flavor's gone. Why am I chewing this? Absolutely. I was going to say about Raging Bull, I actually met LaMotta, and not a good guy.
Yeah.
A historic boxer and a very interesting career. Not a nice person.
Yeah.
And that's fine, whatever, But I know what you mean in terms of watching somebody crumble like that too is not a pleasant thing I'd raise your hand if you're a nihilistic film fan, but I didn't know they're out there.
That's funny. Well, I mean, again, a lot of this, there's a certain art house kind of quality to a lot of that. In the old days, there used to be that you would see a really stark kind of portrait of somebody in a spiral, and it's not that's certainly valid as a movie. It's just not valid as popcorn gambler. Entertainment. And that's the problem I think we're in now. Maybe that even goes back to what Scorsese took heat for, as far as complaining about the superhero or the Marvel movies, is the idea that those movies are getting all the attention. It's not that they're sucking up a lot of oxygen in the room, but there's still room for interesting stuff. It's just that those are getting, an inordinate amount of attention. So they're the popcorn movies, and they're no different than the James Bond movies of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Those movies are also no different than the old-fashioned Hollywood tentpole movie, which used to be something like the Greatest Show on Earth or the Ten Commandments or what have you. Each studio would put out a multi-million-dollar big production, and when we were kids, they usually came out around Christmas.
Right.
And those things attracted an inordinate amount of attention, and they generally had all the stars in the world or what have you. So that's been going on for a long time.
But there was more room in the theater, and more people were seeking out Godfather and the weightier stuff. And yes, there was. I mean, Irwin Allen, all of his disaster movies, and that's a great example of big productions with multiple celebrities.
The Towering Inferno,
exactly.
The Poseidon Adventure, right?
Absolutely, yes, those kinds of movies. And but there was still room for Coming Home and even The Turning Point, all about ballet.
Yeah,
and Bancroft and Shirley MacLaine.
Right, but the thing is, not everybody saw those, because that wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea. I think that the big tentpole movies have or at least used to have a wider appeal. It was like, if you're going to see one movie this year, you see Ben-Hur or something. I think that's always been with us. The thing is, the movie business has changed so that now the movies that we're talking about, even that Martin Scorsese is talking about, it's almost justification for him to be able to do The Irishman on Netflix as opposed to a movie theater. The streaming services have tons of movies in that range. They're low to mid-level, and there's tons of them that are great. Like I get the New York Times, I read the Times. On Friday, they usually do movie reviews for stuff playing in New York, and they're smaller movies. I read the reviews, I write down the title of the film, and then I go on Netflix, and I'll find them, and get the DVD or whatever, rent the DVD from Netflix. And they're fabulous little movies. The problem is that it's not like going, just the same as comic books. It's not like going to a comic spinner rack where there's a finite number of slots. Going to a movie where there's maybe, 2 or 4 movies at most in a theater. Everything's out at once. So it's harder to find them. And that's a valid thing, whether it's, like the Irishman got a lot of promotion from Netflix. We knew it was on Netflix, as opposed to a lot of movies that just show up on Netflix or Amazon or wherever that get no promo, or they get one little notice on the Friday that they start streaming, and then that's it. So, I mean, it's like, again, like being a comic artist or creator, you can put out your book, and if your book isn't, if you're doing it yourself, you're not going to have a big promotional push, but most of this stuff goes to the comic store, and then that's it. It sells or it doesn't sell. Right. And a lot of stuff gets forgotten, and a lot of stuff is still good. It's just that, even your own audience, like my audience, what have you been doing lately? Well, I did this, and this actually, like this Captain America thing I did with Roy.
Yeah, last year.
An Invaders Captain America story.
Came out we talked about it last year, absolutely.
Right. That thing, it seems like it sold pretty well, but I was still having to sell it to people. In other words, like, what have you been doing lately? Well, I did this thing, and I think you guys who liked All-Star Squadron, who liked all this stuff, would really like this. And, I never heard of it or something.
Did you? So, were you able? Did you have it at your table? Like, you were at I know you're going to be at Terrificon again, and you were there in the summer and stuff in August. But, like, did you have the Cap issue at your table?
I had a couple of copies of it just because I think I went to Heroes Con before it came out, and I was telling people it was coming out. So by the time Terrificon, I thought, well, I bought a couple extras. I'll put them out here just in case people didn't know it existed. But
sure.
I think it sold well. It's just, they sold. But I do think that there's, it's very easy. Again, the nature of comics is that every week there's a new batch. The nature of TV or movies is there's always new material. So it's harder to keep up. If you miss it that first week,
And your collaboration with Roy, it really wasn't a one-issue, one-shot. It wasn't a graphic novel.
Yeah.
It was oversized, right?
No, it was. Well, the page count was 30 pages. So I guess maybe it was a little longer than a normal comic. But
but still around like 20, 24, something like that.
No, it was like I said, the art page. There was 30 pages.
30 pages of story. Well, that's a comic and a half today.
Yeah. So I did. I know
to you and me, it's like, what? It's a comic. What?
I just finished the Submariner story with. It was for the Marvel Snapshots, which is celebrating the Marvel's Kurt Busiek, Alex Ross thing. Yes. And the Submariner story is written by Alan Brennert, who wrote I immediately, Alan and I had almost worked together maybe 10 years ago on that top 10 Alan Moore ABC thing.
Yeah, for Wildstorm, Alan Moore's
and then
police procedural.
He was going to write the top 10 miniseries like that I wound up drawing with Paul DiFilippo, which Paul did a fantabulous job. But
I had Paul on the show to talk about it. Absolutely, man. That was one of my first, within my first year of Word Balloon.
That's funny. Yeah, but so the Alan couldn't do it because I think he went to work as story editor on that Scott Bakula Star Trek show. So it was like the timing was whatever that he just had gotten the either head writer or something like story editor or something on that show, so he couldn't do it. But
oh wow! So
this came up again in the summer, and Kurt Busiek said, "Hey, I want to put you guys together on this." So it's a retro story set in 1946, right after the war, 45,
Excellent.
46.
All Winter Squad era, I believe.
Yeah, and it's a pretty much Submariner centric, but it has the All Winners in it, and it takes place mostly at the Palisades amusement park. So there's a little extra comic bonus for anybody who's old enough to remember the Superman ads in the DC comics with Superman holding the Palisades amusement park and the free coupon or half off coupon or whatever.
Yes. Hilarious.
So this thing comes out in, I think it comes out in March.
Oh, that's awesome, Jerry. I'm really glad we're talking now that people can look for it and grab it, man. That's amazing.
A 30-page story, so that seems to be my thing now. So, and currently working on a thing that Craig Russell is adapting Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book.
Wow, that's terrific.
For Dark Horse. So I'm doing again about 30 pages.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's going to be 30 pages as well.
Yeah, but over 2 issues. So, so it's been fun. I mean, to me, it's kind of fun because I was a big fan of the Norse mythology book. Gaiman, the audiobook, he narrated it himself, and it's just it was kind of interesting to hear some of the myths of Thor's hammer and different Loki stories and stuff, but he did a nice job narrating it. So when the Dark Horse asked me, I was like, wow, there's one that I love that book. And I actually am getting to do one of my favorite stories in there. So it's a Loki story mostly, but Loki and the dwarves, and It's been a lot of fun. I'm about halfway through it.
So, and is it P. Craig Russell or is it a different Craig Russell?
Yeah, no, P. Craig Russell. It
is P. Craig Russell. Great.
Yes,
so is he adapting the prose? I mean, you're both artists, so what's going on?
Yeah, Craig did the American Gods with Dark Horse, and I think it's just finished up or is just finishing up. I'm not sure if the last issue.
The American Gods adaptation is just finishing up. Go on.
So this is he's adapting the script, and then he actually kind of a cool throwback, and I guess this is the way he likes to work. But he had the boards lettered on the board, and the Galen Showman, I think, is the guy who did the lettering. It's really beautiful lettering. It's very reminiscent of John Workman lettering.
Wow. Wow.
But Craig did like really rough layouts just to pace out the panels and, put the balloons in. So I'm working off of the boards that actually have lettering on, which is kind of fun.
Wow, that's really cool. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is this the first time that you and Craig have worked together?
My Wonder Woman story that I did with Walt Simonson back in early 2000s, we did like an 8-issue, I think it was an 8-issue or 6-issue. I forget if it was 8 or 6, but a Wonder Woman storyline that fell right between Phil Jimenez's run, at the end of Phil's run, but before the Greg Rucka relaunch.
Oh,
so it was about 2004, maybe 3. 2003 or 4.
Oh,
which they actually finally collected that in 2018, 2017. I think they
probably in support of the movie, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was a cool story because I sought that one out when I'd heard Mike Carlin's assistant editor Ivan Cohen at the time. Ivan had said, "Oh, I just inherited the Wonder Woman book, and you know what? I got Walt Simonson to write a story that fits in before we do the relaunch or whatever." And I was like, "Wait, Walt Simonson's writing a Wonder Woman. Can I draw that?" And it was like, I didn't even think of you. And I wound up talking myself into it. So it was fun.
That's awesome.
It was definitely. So Craig wound up. P. Craig Russell inked that. And,
wow, that's cool. Sure.
Yeah, and then I think we met for the first time at, I want to say it was Baltimore a couple of years ago at the Baltimore Con.
Okay.
And I had never met him before that point. We had talked on the phone a couple of times, but he was, it was nice. And again, that's
great.
I don't know how it came up with me, but I'm glad because it's a fun change of pace from, the superhero type stuff. So.
Sure. No, Craig's been on the show a couple times over the years, and I always enjoy talking to him. He's great. And we mentioned Doctor Strange earlier. I loved his Doctor Strange. It was amazing.
Well, he's my hero because I remember telling him this. I had read this. I don't know if you know much of the history of there's always been like a little, especially Marvel-style storytelling, there's always been that kind of dispute going on between writers and artists as far as the way a Marvel comic traditionally was done. I don't know that they do it this way anymore, but in the old days, you would get an outline, which was more like it was not structured. You would have to break it down into page breaks. In other words, somebody would just type up, say, a page, and it would have a general story, and you would fill it in, basically, what you're improvising with as an artist and stretching stuff.
Yeah, would a page represent the whole story, or a page?
No. The page, the page would represent the whole story. So you'd have to go through
Amazing.
That, and you'd have to
the Marvel
1,
method. Go
2,
on.
3. So you'd have to figure out how it paced out over 20 pages or 22 pages.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, man.
So I guess Craig had his little story, which just cracked me up, and I'd read about it years and years ago. When Marvel first started returning artwork, the guy who made that decision, of course, was a writer, and that I don't know if it was Roy or if it was one of the other editor-in-chiefs that there was like a rotating thing.
Yeah.
But the decision was made that the writer would get like two pages of original art from the book, and he was part of the split. So there wasn't just the inker and the penciler splitting. The writer got like a couple of pages, 2 or 3. And a lot of artists had a problem with that because, hey, you didn't actually, the letterer probably has a better claim to getting a page because he lettered physically on these.
Right.
So that was an argument that existed back in the 70s. Well, Craig did a Doctor Strange thing, which was apparently in limbo for a long time. He had plotted it and drawn it, and I think what happened was whoever was going to write it, Marvel didn't do it, and then maybe a period of time later, it was revived, and I think Marv dialogued it. And during that time when art was supposed to go, some of it was supposed to go to the writer, Craig was adamant that Marv, because he came onto it late, he just basically dialogued something that was pre-existing. There's no way I'm going to let Marv have a page or whatever. So the legend that I read was just funny, because he had finished his pages in pencil and ink, and the artwork, all the captions and the word balloons were done on paste up. Craig went through all of his art and carefully peeled the rubber cement balloons off of all the art, put it in an envelope, and sent it to Marv. and kept the art for the book himself. And I just always thought, like, wow, if things were always that simple that you could just peel it off. It was just a funny story, and I was pretty young when I'd heard that. I guess maybe it was because I think that thing had come out. Was that in the late 70s or something?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I believe and maybe it's a different story, but there was that one. There's something disturbing you, Stephen. Was kind of the mantra of the story, or what is it that disturbs you, Stephen? That's what it is. And I don't know if that's the same story or not. I have heard that story before. I'm really glad you're retelling it because it is awesome. And especially knowing the different personalities of Craig and Marv. Man, I would love to be a fly on the wall during that conversation.
Well, and I mean, at the time when they had that art thing, I wasn't even in comics, but I remember thinking, this doesn't seem fair.
Sure.
You know? And again, the argument is who makes the rules. And if the editors are all writers, well, then it's kind of skewed towards the writer, you know. So I thought that was just a funny protest that always grabbed me. So when I finally saw him in person and we were hanging around, I said, I gotta thank you for that. That I don't know if that was true or not. And he's like, oh no, it was true. He kind of corrected
Craig said that. Yeah. There you go. Yes.
So it was fun.
That's awesome, man. Well, all right, Jerry, you just opened a door that I want to go into for a second. When Wizard came out, especially the early issues, they would list the credits of a comic, artist first, then writer. Mm-hmm. And I know this was during the 90s, and, obviously the big speculation boom, and it was obviously the art that was leading that speculation and stuff like that. So was that an actual, because of all the speculation stuff going on, was that a shift of power, not, employee power to the artist? Yeah. And was it a very different decade than the others?
Well, here's what it was to me. And I remember I did it on my books when I was doing, I forget if I started it when I was working with Grummett, I think on Adventures of Superman. Tom was drawing it. I think I started it then. But Byrne is the first guy I saw do it. John started doing it, as I recall, on Iron Man when he was working with Romita Jr.
Okay.
That he started crediting Romita Jr., and he put the art credit ahead of the writer credit. And the justification for it has always been that Marvel style, as opposed to someone writing a full script that said, panel 1, page 2, so-and-so, here's what they say, everything's there for you, you just have to be an art monkey and draw to make the word balloons work. Well, and this is true. It's a more technical thing.
Okay.
But when you're working Marvel style, you don't have the word balloons. You don't have anything. You have no real acting. You just have an outline of what's supposed to happen, and you're taking whatever is there and you're fleshing it out, because it's a harder job than you can imagine, especially when you used to have to break the stuff down by pages, because sometimes, you really had to edit a lot. You know what I mean? Like, I would get plots on, even when I was working on Superman initially, or with Roy, even with All-Star Squadron when I was drawing that, a lot of the times the plots would be a lot of pages, but they were more than you could fit in, basically. So it would be like someone would just, and Marv did this on Superman as well, if you tried really hard to get everything that they wanted in there, you'd have 12-panel pages. So it was an editing job. You had to say, well, how important is it that this panel or that this sequence happens in that sequence? So you had to do basically an adaptation of someone's outline, which is a lot more work, and it's more gratifying because you're in charge of the story. You're like driving the car. You're no longer
you're the director.
In the back. Yeah,
you're the director, and the writer is the screenwriter. Yeah.
So the writer then sees your pencils, and you would make margin notes to make sure that he could follow whatever, rather than going back to the plot, he could follow it. So the margin notes would then inform what the intent is with each panel, or maybe what somebody's talking about, or they're angry, they're whatever. So they had that guideline. So they initiated it. If they were the sole writer and now co-plotting, they would initiate that plot. But then once the artist had it, the artist would really adapt it. So that happened with Kirby. That happened with Steve Ditko. That happened with John Buscema. Those guys, all those Marvel guys, did that. They would take something that was Romita, all of them. They take Don Heck. They take something that was a quick idea, and they would fill out and basically tell a story over 20 pages or 22 pages.
Sure.
That seemed to be, not that one's more important, but that's a bigger chunk of the work. That's where I think Byrne started with, because he was working with Romita Jr. I think he inherited the book from another writer, but John Romita Jr. had lots of story ideas. Just like when I was working with John, when we were doing the Superman stuff, we were co-plotting it, and it wasn't always every issue was 50-50, but, you're throwing a lot of ideas into it. So it was in deference to that. So when I started writing with Tom, I think I did it with Tom Grummett on Adventures, but I definitely did it after that on Power Shazam as well. And it was just pretty much just a statement that, yes, I value what your contribution is.
Absolutely. Well, and I know today in the creator-owned world, literally all of my interviews, and I'm really glad we're talking, Jim, because sometimes it's like, well, John only talks to writers. I'm like, no, that's not true. And I won't deny, as coming from a broadcast writing standpoint, that sometimes, especially early on, I was talking more to writers and stuff. Yeah. But no, I do know the creator-owned people that I talk to now are very much, both when I talk to the artist and the writer, it's like, oh, no. Jerome Pena and Tony Moore were crucial to Fear Agent for Rick Remender. Pulling three names out of my ass. But and Nick Darrington, when he's worked with Hickman on their creator-owned stuff, and all these other people, it's like, it's definitely.
And here's the thing: I've been in it long enough to see the wave. Like when I was working at DC, DC was always full script, and there's reasons for having a full script, because basically, if the writer writes his script with the balloons and with all the direction to it, he gets paid right then when he turns it in. With a plot first, you have to wait till the artist does the pencils, and then you get the second half of the payment when you do the dialogue. So, from a physical point of view, it's a different setup. When Roy Thomas and Marv Wolfman and Doug Minch and Jerry Conway went from Marvel to DC, they were all used to working plot style. So when I worked at DC, I don't think I ever worked on a full script until the days of the early 2000s. That's the first time I ever had a full script, a complete script with balloons in it and everything else. And it's a harder, a more technical way of having to work, because it always felt more organic to be the guy to set up the panel order and to be the guy who, for an artistic reason, Joe Blow is on the left and Jane Doe is on the right. It would dictate who speaks first. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of, when you get a full script and you have multiple panels of the same people in the same scene, you have to arrange your panel based on who speaks first, really. So you have to leave room for stuff, and you have to block out where the balloons would go. It dictates your actual panel arrangement and your visual setup. So it takes a little of the fun away, As somebody who always, I always felt like I always contribute something, even on a full script. I'll throw in stuff with characters acting or using props or something, kind of acting like. But with again, plot style, a lot of more of the burden is on the artist. So it just felt like that was in the air at that time, and that happened really before Image, a couple of years before. But Image really happened, I think, more so because that initial group of guys, and I know Jim Lee, I think, had to be talked into it, but the Todd McFarlane and Rob and Eric Larson were all on board and Jim Valentino was like, wait, we're doing the lion's share of the work, and their issue was that the royalties were cut differently. So that's what started Image, was the fact that in comics, when royalties started, the writer got a share, the penciler got a share, and the inker got a share. Well, the penciling and inking share was generally bigger at Marvel than the writer's share. At DC, the writer's share was bigger than the penciling inking share combined at DC. So each company had a different thing, and none of that mattered if you were working on a book that wasn't making a big royalty. Sure. Once a couple of these books started selling big royalties, people then were going, wait, I made this great amount of money, but the guy who wrote this, who didn't put as much work into it, he made 1.5 times what I made. Is that fair? So that's really where that argument, I think, kind of became politicized to a degree, as opposed to just being totally about creativity or whatever. It became an issue of making money for a writer, and it was justified to a degree. But hey, all the years that I worked in comics, when I first started writing, it was an uphill battle, because guys like Byrne and Walt Simonson and Frank Miller kind of brought that. Starlin too had brought that writing back to the artist, whereas it used to be a thing. it was certainly a thing for Will Eisner. It was certainly a thing during different times in comic history, and in the time in those days, the writers were afraid. And I know I talked to different writers during that time frame. It's like, wow, all the good artists are leaving, which meant they were no longer going to have access to these good artists, as opposed to, I hate Image or I hate, whatever. They were just losing collaborators who were making them look good. Because a good artist is going to make your story better.
Of course, absolutely. Yes.
So, it's just weird. There are so many things at play during that time. And unfortunately, the snapback from the market collapse was that it did kind of eventually wind up putting the writers back in the forefront, which they always should be equal. I always felt it always should be an equal thing. You shouldn't mention Tom King without mentioning whoever's drawing the thing that he worked on. And I think Tom would agree.
Yeah. Well, I had Tom, Mitch, and Doc on. They're doing the new Adam Strange.
Right.
Strange Adventures.
Strange Adventures,
yeah. No, it's amazing, honestly. And were you an Adam Strange guy as a kid?
No, I was Marvel maniac at that point.
Okay.
Although I drew an Adam Strange story that Grant Morrison wrote for one of the Julie Schwartz
the
kind of tribute
stuff.
Comics. And,
holy shit! I got to dig that up, man. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was fun. It was I think that's the only time I worked with Grant directly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. That's fantastic. I look forward to checking it out, man. Again, we're close in the same age. Didn't you think by the time we were in our 50s as a little kid, didn't you think, we'll probably have jetpacks? Everyone will have a jetpack eventually. I thought for certain, between Thunderball and all those halftime shows of guys tooling around in jetpacks, I'm like, all right, this is the 70s. I'm like, 40 years from now, they'll figure it out.
Sure, flying cars.
Yes. Well, but I don't know why. I was really hoping more for the jetpack than I was the flying car. I got to be honest, man.
Well, you know what, though? The problem is, as a 50-year-old, or in my case, as a 60-year-old, I feel kind of like I can see the inherent horrible danger of a flying car or a jetpack. I think of the same thing is true of the drones. Once you got Amazon and all these food services delivering stuff by drone, how long is it going to be before some drone takes off the top of your head while you're walking down the street?
Totally. Or literally blow out your ass with a jetpack or something like that. Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. That's
with the jetpack, you just need those asbestos pants, and you're good to go.
See, we're halfway there, Jim. We are halfway there. It could actually help. And I always say, it's like, all right, we got the supercomputers in our pockets. That's pretty cool. Don't get me wrong. But, because that was the other thing, watching 66 Batman. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool to have your own computer like that? That would be amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Here we are.
Well, didn't they do that? And they did something, I was trying to remember where they did that the first time I saw it, where Batman, Bruce Wayne had like a big computer set up in his trunk of his car. Wasn't that like in the 70s that they first showed that?
On the Adam West show. I remember.
Not on the show, but I thought it was in the comics for some reason. I want to say there was something where I remember, like maybe even during the Neil Adams era, where he's got some kind of a computer or something in there. I was like, well, there you go, you get your mobile computer.
Or that
now we have like a little watch,
that awesome sports car version of the Batmobile that they had in that Frank Robbins and Neil Adams and Irv Novick.
That was a great era.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. And honestly, I'm and then again as an Invaders artist yourself and stuff like that. Frank Robbins, it fascinated the hell out. He was another slow burn like the Joker, where initially I'm like, oh, this is ugly. But then really, I kept buying Invaders, and I'm like, there is something happening here in this art. Even 12-year-old me knew it was, it's like,
That's
wait a
funny.
minute, this is cool.
See, I remember buying the first couple issues because I did have them in my collection of the Invaders, but then I just never liked the Vince Colletta combo. So I never read past that point. But when I was in advance of doing the Invaders thing with Roy in last spring, I went and I had bought the 2 trade papersbacks that Marvel had done.
The collections, yeah.
And I reread all those, and it made me understand what he was doing in All-Star Squadron more, because I really didn't have a reference point for what he was doing in All-Star Squadron at the time, but he was doing pretty much the same thing in the Invaders. I just didn't realize it.
Oh, God, yeah.
Weaving real stuff in. But with Frank Robbins, the thing that's fun is I had an earlier experience with Frank Robbins via him doing those Man-Bat stories when he was writing them, but he drew a couple of those Batmans during I think it was the era when maybe right before Archie Goodwin took over the Batman book, the Detective Comics. Mm-hmm. But in that time frame, and then Frank Robbins did I think he did a Shadow or a couple of issues of Shadow where he actually pencil and inked himself, and I preferred that. As wonky as that stuff was, it was like seeing Lee Elias inking himself as opposed to having someone else ink those guys, because they had an all-over approach. It was like an inker would kind of maybe water it down, and that was probably the intent, I'm sure.
Yes.
Roy wanted Colletta to make it look a little more superhero-like or something, but it was just always fighting itself to me when I looked at those books, and I could never totally appreciate it. But yeah, Frank Robbins inking himself was always aces. I just thought he was it was wonky, weird. If you can love like Todd McFarlane, like Marvel age stuff when he was doing Hulk or whatever, you could appreciate Frank Robbins because they were trying to do something very different. Whether they weren't appealing to the masses, I don't think.
Well, and I love Johnny Hazard, his comic strip.
Oh yeah.
That for people who don't know it, think and no disrespect meant for Frank Robbins, poor man Steve Canyon. Yeah. Because essentially it was the same kind of foreign intrigue format of, kind of a guy going around getting jobs all over the world. And, oh, God, I love his Johnny Hazard. And you're right, because, and I'm always defending Vinny Colletta. In fact, I think Mitch and I were talking about Vinny a couple days ago. So, I don't know, man.
The problem...
Did you ever know him?
What's that?
Did you ever know him or meet him?
Yeah, I have one personal contact, which wasn't great. I went to D.C. I went to New York City from Mike Macklin and I drove from Wisconsin to Rhode Island. We met up with a guy in Rhode Island who had some kind of contact to get us into D.C. and to Marvel. So he drove my car then from Rhode Island to New York City in 1977, right before I guess it was like in the summer, maybe July-ish or early July. And I set up an appointment at Marvel. Well, Marvel wasn't seeing anybody. Nobody could get into Marvel. So Jim Shooter came out of the lobby to the lobby and talked to me and to Mike, and he gave us a bunch of Xeroxes of people's pencils for whatever they were getting ready to get rid of that had been inked, books that, they keep the pencils as long as the artwork is in transit or whatever. Once the artwork completed and in-house and statted, they could get rid of the pencil Xeroxes. So he gave us a stack.
Wow.
Which was cool, and we learned a lot from that. We went, so we got no work from them, but then we went to D.C. where I had an appointment with Vinny Colletta, who was the art director at the time.
Okay, yeah.
And Vinny, it was such a frustrating thing. An official appointment, so I brought pages of my Messenger comic, which the only thing I really had. I didn't do specific samples, but I had written, drawn, and inked like a 10-page Messenger story. This is my own character. Mm-hmm. And that was my sample, 1977. And Colletta is sitting there, and he's in a leisure suit. And I want to think it was either tan or kind of pale green, like a seafoam.
Classic, right? Absolutely.
And,
avocado.
And he's looking at these, and he's going, I can't see the pencils. I can't see the pencils. And I'm like, well, I penciled and inked it. No, I just want to look at pencils. And I'm like, okay, nobody told me that. I just drove, 1,000+ miles. I can't drive home and get pencils. And he's like, come back and bring me some pencils. And I said, well, can you judge the inks? Can you give me a critique on the inks? I'm not looking at inks. And that was it. So I had this just like weep wow, like I came all this way, and it didn't turn out well for me. But I got to meet at DC's office. I got to meet Joe Staten, super nice guy. It was he was nice. Got to meet Al Milgrom, although Al was not long.
I believe
for
both
DC.
of them were at Terrificon last year. But
go
on.
And Al was fired soon after that in a DC implosion. So Al was.
Wow, I never knew Al worked at DC.
He was an editor. He was an editor. It was around the time that he and Conway did the Firestorm initially, but Al was also an editor. And Larry Hama, briefly. There was both editors, both of them let go during at the implosion. And Mike Macklin looked like Mike was coming up aces because Al wanted to hire Mike to take over layouts on All-Star Comics, which Wally Wood at the time was still the finisher on.
Gotcha.
And
was Giffen
Paul,
was
before
Giffen
Keith, right before Keith. So
okay, go on.
He was taking over for Rick Estrada.
Sure. Yes.
So Al is going to say, "Hey, Mike, I'm going to give you a script. You go back to Wisconsin, and then you do some pages for me. And if this works out, great." So Mike is riding on cloud nine, as we used to say it back in the 1920s. So Paul Levitz comes over, and he looks down, and he goes, "We don't have enough work for the people we got. You can't be hiring anybody." So that ended that. So Mike and I and our friend from Rhode Island went to a liquor store and each bought a bottle. The guy driving, he didn't have a bottle, but Mike and I each bought a bottle of booze, and we drank on the 2.5 hour drive back to Rhode Island to drown our sorrows.
Yeah, man.
That was my Vinnie Coletta thing, and I every time I've told that story, people have said Vinnie Coletta wearing a leisure suit, and I'm like, you got to understand, leisure suits were like the hot, trendy thing at that time, and they're like, no, I never saw Vinnie in anything but a tailored, Armani or some kind of fancy suit.
Interesting.
And I asked everybody of that era, and they all were like, no, I don't think so. And I finally found one guy, Tom Siaka, who was a fan artist, and Tom actually was doing backgrounds for Vinny around that era, in that 74, 75, whatever. And or maybe 76, somewhere around there. But he did confirm to me that, Vinny did wear leisure suits because they were the height of fashion.
Right? Oh, dude, you remember? I love watching The $6 Million Man.
Oh, right.
Because it's the history of the leisure suit from 72 to 78 or whatever. Yeah.
And I
know you're right.
I had a leisure suit. My mom thought she was doing me such a big favor because I usually when I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money, and I always wound up wearing, if I had to wear a suit coat to someone's funeral, it was always like a hand-me-down from my much larger and older brother, Mike, who was 6'3", and I was still growing. So I'd have these suits that were the arms were really long and stuff. So when I graduated high school, 1975, I graduated high school. My mom made this gesture and bought me a leisure suit at Sears.
Sure.
And it was like tan. It was the pants and this coat, and anybody who has any doubts about how futuristic a leisure suit was in 1975, it really was like what you would see in maybe even Soylent Green or some of those movies that were future-based, because it wasn't like a collar thing. It was more like almost like a shirt over a shirt. With
very unconventional compared to traditional suits for people who've never seen leisure suits before. Absolutely.
But opposed to looking at, if you're going looking for, artistic reference, and you wind up looking at fashion sites or GQ, you're not going to probably see a leisure suit. But if you're, honest, it's like this is what people wore because they sold them in Sears and they sold them at JCPenney.
Right. Oh, like you said, man, no. There's pictures of me in leisure suits from the 70s, no question. Especially little kids, because that was a cheap way to dress them up and everything. And it was accepted. No, I agree. There's Rosemont, Illinois, the Donald Stevens Center. Don Stevens himself, who was a longtime mayor of Rosemont, and a rather shady character, is the last guy. I remember in 1988 or 89, him wearing a leisure suit at some public event.
That's funny.
And yeah, it's, yikes. And then kind of had the same background that Vinny supposedly had as well. So we'll leave it at that for people who can read between the lines. So, too funny.
That is funny, though. I mean, there's a style trend that, like I said, when you're an artist and you're looking for, like I said, I drew a story set in 1946. I immediately start looking at what are people dressed in, especially women's styles change more drastically, I think, than men's, but I wanted to see what suit styles, what would people be wearing for the background stuff. And, you do run into the trick of if you start looking at Vogue or you start looking at high-end stuff, it's the same as now. Like, look at a fashion show in New York that maybe just happened, and you go, okay, none of that stuff ever is going to hit the street. That's
like
just
the
there
high
for
concept
shock
stuff.
value.
Yeah. Right. Oh, and even back then it was like that with Vogue and everything?
Yeah. It was. There were high-end things, and those. If you ever look at those, like they look futuristic, but they never became streetwear. That's
sure.
That's the lesson is that, people generally would shop. Again, you would be shopping at a department store. You're not going to be shopping at some designer store or whatever.
So. No, absolutely not. No.
And like cars, people have cars for 15, 20 years. So, if you draw a 1946 story, you're not going to draw all 1946 cars. You're going to draw maybe a couple, but most of them are going to be from the earlier, 10 years earlier even,
Well, and also production had shut down during the war and everything went into tanks and planes.
And a lot of them they weren't even updated too. So they're probably, if they were making any, they were probably using the same assembly lines the way they were,
Yeah, in the late 30s and early 40s, absolutely, pre-war. No, I think you're right. Interesting. I was going to ask regarding the Namor story and the All-Winter Squad. So do we have depowered Captain America, who's really Jeff Mace the Patriot?
Yeah, but they don't. I mean, again, none of those. The involvement of those characters is all in superhero efforts, as opposed. So there's no alter egos mentioned.
Right.
But
but I'm saying like this, so that at no point there's an interaction with Namor and Cap where it's Jeff Mace as opposed to Steve. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think Kiesel did that great miniseries a couple of years ago. Yep. That really, went into like Jeff Mace's Captain America, and I mean, as you did as well, I'm sure those What Ifs from the '70s, the first run of What If, God, those Invader stories were just awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, always, and I loved when Brubaker put it in the continuity and stuff with his Winter Soldier run.
Oh yeah,
and he had that great moment at Arlington Cemetery with the Eternal Flames, and they were the tributes to both the Spirit of '76 and Jeff Mace.
Right. Well,
I love that.
Did you ever? I do this with. I wanted to just refresh myself on as much as I could, so I pulled probably every 1940s set thing that might apply, and I wound up reading the Brubaker and Epting had done. Was it the Marvel's Project? Was that what it was called? It was like a 12-issue miniseries.
I love that book.
And that
absolutely.
was really nice.
And expanded all the timely, like all the backup heroes that were in those Human Torch and Submariner books and everything.
Yeah. No, and it's nice, when someone could take something that, like Brubaker did a great job with that because he took something that pre-existed, but they also added stuff in that didn't exist. I think that's kind of cool. Speaking of that, the current book that I'm loving tremendously is the Indestructible Hulk. I kept buying it. Mitch had told me, "Oh, this is pretty good," and I was buying it, and they were stacking up. And I realized that I was buying it, and I hadn't read any of them. So I just sat down, and I think I read like 4 or 5 of them each day, and read through the up to current run. And it's an amazing book. In the same way, I mean, if I were to, it's nicely drawn. It's got some really great ideas in it, but they turn the Hulk into a monster book, which is very appropriate.
Absolutely, it is. Of course, it is.
But really, really nicely done, and it's outstanding in the same way to me as I was reading it, with the use of taking what was old and putting a fresh spin on it, in the same way that, like, I think Jeff Johns did with his Green Lantern run when he came up with the multiple color spectrum lanterns. It was like, well, this idea was always there, waiting for somebody to find it, and like with the Hulk, Al Ewing is just finding all kinds of little pieces in stories that existed years ago and new stuff as well. It's fascinating.
I agree. Absolutely. It's amazing. The Hulk is his most dangerous he's been in years.
Yeah.
In Al Ewing's hands. I completely agree. It's incredible. And I haven't had Al on the show yet, and that's one of my projects where it's like you gotta meet and get Al Ewing on the show. That's gotta happen. And I have enough mutual people that he's worked with that would likely at least introduce me to him and everything.
Yeah. No, it's a nice run. It's a nice run. I think other than that, I've been reading little snippets of things, but mostly been reading a lot of Marvel stuff. And
that's cool.
I've been enjoying the current storyline in the Captain America books. Kind of re-envisioning
stuff.
Yeah, it's the new story. I read his run from the beginning, and I liked it, but I felt like this new story reads like a really good crime novel. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it seems more representative of that type of like a Jack Reacher book or
cool.
it's got that which I really like. I mean, those are some of my favorite. I like the Michael Connelly stuff and the like the Jack Reacher as a character is great. The books are always fun. Yeah. Michael Connelly with Harry Bosch and all those. I like those a lot. So,
were you ever a Spencer novel fan?
I read a bunch of them. I think he was too prolific for me. You know what I mean? I think
Robert Parker was too prolific.
Yeah, because he wrote so many of those Spencer books. They're really fun, and I actually wound up sampling more of them. At one point, I had a friend who was loaning me audiobooks because the guy, a friend of mine who used to own Cave Comics, Pat Callanan, his wife at the time was on a long commute, so she would buy audiobooks, and she was a big Spencer fan. So he would say, hey, she listened to these once, do you want to borrow them? So while I was drawing, I'd put the when they're on CDs or whatever.
Yeah.
And I listened to probably, 20 of them or whatever. And they're
Spencer novels.
They're really well written, and I enjoyed them. But
God, yeah. Well, have you seen, I don't know if you saw on Netflix, Mark Wahlberg is doing, and let's put it in comic terms, a Spencer Year One story.
Oh, interesting.
And it's apparently when he first meets Hawk, who was played by Avery Brooks for listening, on the TV show. And I'm quintessential Hawk. Got to tell Avery Brooks that, and it's one of the best nerd moments of my life being able to tell him that.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It was excellent.
And Avery Brooks from Star Trek TV. So.
Oh, yes, indeed, yeah. Captain Sisko. I know, man. We're at 2 hours. I don't know how much time you have left because I could easily go another 2 talking about Star Trek. And I know I'm talking to Mike Allred's kid. And this is a good tease for Word Balloon, everybody, although I'm not sure which one I'll release first. But Mike Allred's son is making a documentary about Mike, and he's going to do a Kickstarter for it and everything. But anyway, have you seen this trailer for this Spencer movie?
No, I haven't. Is it a movie or is it going to be a series?
I think it's going to be a Netflix movie.
Oh, okay.
And it looks like it's going to be, and especially given Wahlberg likely is... I don't know. It's interesting. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to an actor about what's it like doing a 10 episode TV show versus a 6-month movie.
Yeah.
How much of a production time, shooting time difference is there?
Yeah.
I don't really know.
Well, I think with a TV show, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt here.
Oh, no. I was going to say, the way you haven't seen it yet, I want you to see it.
The way they're doing these shows, the Netflix model, so to speak, or FX model, like FX was doing with Fargo and things like that, is the same thing, HBO model. It's like they would write the full season of scripts. So they weren't like writing as they go along, like on a regular series where you have 20 episodes or whatever, where they're writing it ahead, but they're still not writing the end of it all at once. With these shows, they write 10 episodes, and then I think they film based on that too, so they can make it more economical to film like certain actors who may not be in the whole thing. They can film almost all of their scenes. They can do it much more economically. So I think that's why probably more movie actors are even doing it, because obviously TV's in a resurgence era, prime TV era. It's like it's good to do a TV show, and if you're taking the same time and you normally do 2 movies a year, you can do that 1 movie and you can do a 10-episode show. You're going to help your fan base, but also you're going to be able to do something different,
Totally agree. No, I absolutely about that. Oh God, that just reminded me of something else I wanted to ask you. But yeah, I was really interested if you've seen it yet. It disappoints me in the way, or potentially might disappoint me based on the trailer, in the way that when Jason Statham did that Parker movie.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh no, that's not who. No, Lee Marvin, man. Lee Marvin got it right.
Yeah.
You know, it's. But no, I know I was going to ask a couple of things as we're talking. Well, first of all, the Crisis crossover. I meant to talk about that when we were talking about your covers and stuff. What did you think of the TV show?
I enjoyed it. I think going into it that they're going to be limited in what they can do.
Sure.
And they did more than I thought they would. Like, they had the giant anti-monitor in that last part, and they did some clever stuff. The only feeling of, at the very end, I felt like they shot themselves in the foot, because it seemed like the entire goal of this was to streamline everything into one world, and that was fine, and it looked like that, but then they did that added thing where they showed all the other worlds that still exist, including the Earth 2 one, and you know what I mean? It was like somebody. It felt almost more like 0 Hour than it felt like Crisis towards that end. You know, like it was.
You're right.
It was not the winnowing down, but it was the culling and relaunching of things, I guess. But but I'm looking forward to Stargirl. I think that little bit that I've seen looked just really amazing.
Oh no, and I mean, that's Jeff's passion, one of Jeff's passion projects.
Yeah.
So he's going to put everything into it. Absolutely. And I agree with you. My one thing artistically, man, I hate to nitpick because I enjoyed it, but that final scene, that final fight with the Anti-Monitor, given that it was done in daylight on rooftops and stuff, I'm like, oh, this should be in outer space, man.
Yeah. No, definitely.
That was my only little thing. So, it was fun. All the stunt casting was ridiculously great.
Yeah, it was. I was really amused to see the Flash and Flash meet, and I think Mitch we were talking about that, and he said that was I guess that was where the Flash from the movie universe actually gets named, because they never named him, and he goes, Flash, oh, that's a good name, something like that. I totally missed that. It went by really fast.
Yeah, he did say that. Yes, I do remember hearing that dialogue. Absolutely.
So that's funny. Yeah. I thought it was, again, I mean, you can only appreciate, if you're probably any of the people working on it, or Mark Guggenheim or whatever, how big of an undertaking it is for a TV show to get production on something like that.
Oh God, yes.
I mean, it's just you're melding probably 4 or 5 different production teams and writers and casts to try to be on the same page, and I think that has to be a real difficult behind the scenes task. So,
agreed.
And they still have their budget. They still have their budget considerations and stuff. So, I thought it definitely exceeded what I thought they could do with it, and it was fun. So, I liked it. I give it a big thumbs up.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm letting Mark decompress, and I'm not going to bother him. But we've known each other for years, and then once again, Terrificon. We shared a limo back to the airport.
Oh, cool.
And spent the whole time talking excitedly about what was coming with this crossover.
Yeah.
And it was like, he's like, they're finally letting us do what we've always wanted to do, and we're really going nuts with the stunt casting. And I'm like, that's fantastic. So it was great to his excitement, and I'm like, oh, you knew it was going to be great. And this is like a year before. I mean, it wasn't this past August; it was 2 August ago that he was talking again, because they were going to get to finally write it and everything and do it. So
Mark, I actually worked with Mark on JSA right before the New 52.
Yes,
Flashpoint wiped everything out. So I think I did like 2.5 issues. The last
was it that short of a run, man?
The last couple of issues of that JSA run, which was kind of funny.
Didn't they bury Alan Scott in the story and everything? Did he die?
He was. I forget what. I don't think they killed him. I think I don't think they needed to end anything. It just they were resolving a storyline. But it was that weird era where Alan Scott's costume looked like he was a giant lantern. It was the craziest.
Yes.
Like how you have to adapt to the times. I remember looking at that and going, "Wait, that's his costume? What am I doing?" It's like hyperbaric chamber.
Man. I was never a fan of Red and Blue Superman in the 90s. I'm like, this is not a good idea.
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. Well, and I'm happy to say I wasn't on the books at that time.
Attaboy. Dodge that bullet, Jesus. Boy, Alan Scott, remember too when they de-aged him and he was Sentinel?
Yeah.
And he was young and everything?
Right.
They did a lot of crazy shit with Alan Scott. I again, like cornerstone All-American Comics hero and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, you know.
Well, like when I was working on the JSA stuff, I did a bunch of fill-in stuff. I was kind of like the regular fill-in, couple pages each issue guy for a while on Jeff Johns' run towards the end, and I always loved the core old guy characters. I loved the Jay Garrick Flash. I loved Wildcat. I loved what he did with those guys. So they were just fun characters to work with and work on. And I had, I could see them close my eyes and I could see what they look like, as old people. Because I did that in All-Star Squadron as young people, and then I did them as older characters in Infinity Inc. So I always felt like it was a shame that core group just disappeared like that. That was my biggest issue with New 52 was, wait, there's 52 Earths, and Earth 2 can't be one of them,
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. Yeah, no, man, what I love mostly about the JSA run that Jeff and James Robinson started and David Goyer for writers, and Don Kramer was on there too, and Dale Eaglesham, and wonderful creators, all top to bottom. Christ, even that Alex Ross,
Steve Sadowski too. He was a penciler.
Steve
for a long time.
Sadowski, absolutely, man. Very cool. Well, but I was always, I just liked their role pre-52 of being, like the mentors.
Yeah.
And then really like, no, we've been doing it forever. We know how to do this.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's what they should be doing. And it was never all right, now you kids go out and play. Grandpa's going to sit in the rocking chair.
Right.
No, they were still doing it.
Right.
And the stories were terrific.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a huge, I agree with you, man. I love it's those costumes, too.
Well, what's funny is when I was as I worked on the first run of the JSA,
All-Star,
when Don Kramer, when that era, and Sadowski, I did like a 2-part fill-in with Sandman. It had Hector Hall as the Sandman, the Kirby, remember
the Kirby Sandman. Yes, I remember that story.
And it was really fun. I remember having a conversation with Jeff and saying that I thought it would be kind of fun to do a story, and it's just an idea I had. I said it would be kind of fun to do like Firebrand, because there's a character from All-Star Squadron. What happened to Firebrand? Well, what if she's an older lady, right? And she's actually being a mentor to new heroes. It was my idea. I just thought it would be be an interesting little story or whatever. And that didn't happen. But then when Jeff did that last incarnation of JSA, it was like, wait, there's Mom, Uncle, and there's the other JSA guys, Flash and Wildcat, and they're being mentors to the new heroes. And I was like, I wonder if I put that in his ear, But I never got to see Firebrand. I was always disappointed,
I was going to say, when was the Firebrand story? I'm bummed that didn't happen.
No.
Do you remember at the end of James's Starman run when Ted Knight dies, and they have the funeral for Ted Knight, and this little old lady comes up, and she's like, "Hi, you don't remember me all, but I was Phantom Lady," and literally looks like Grandma Moses.
Oh, that's
hilarious,
funny.
And especially given especially the 40s through the 90s design of Phantom Lady and stuff, it's like, whoa.
Well, when you mentioned that, my immediate brain image was a Don Martin with an old lady with her boobs down to her knees, like in a frock or a house coat or something.
Of course, absolutely. But in the comics, they made Sandra Knight Ted Knight's cousin. That's hilarious. That's like I remember. I want to say Mark Texera did a convention commission of Ant-Man coming out of the shower. And that's all that needs to be said.
Yeah. It's something you don't need to see.
Yeah.
Move on. Nothing to see here.
I know. So, all right, send your hate mail to john@wordballoon.com. Shame on me.
Well, that'll be your like next year. You could be like Amazing Heroes and do that swimsuit issue, but just in fair play, a sense of fair play, you have like the old characters naked as well or in bathing suits.
Hey, man, every now and then you get a Helen Mirren in a bikini, and you're like, "Hey, nice going, lady. Good for you." By the way, I'm editing all this out because, like, I'll know I'll get jumped on for all this. So. But anyway, all right. Another show that I wanted to ask you about, Watchmen.
Mm-hmm. Enjoyed it.
Did you? Yeah, me too, man.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, that's, as we know from the reaction to the movie, it's like, are you sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
You know, but it was, and I really give Lindelof a lot of credit for saying, no, that's my story. We're done.
Yeah.
I know it was a success. That's great.
But you know what, though? Here's what's more amazing. I like Lindelof stuff. I do. I was a big Lost fan.
Yeah.
I didn't like the ending of Lost.
Okay.
I didn't like the ending of The Leftovers. And
I never saw the ending of The Leftovers, but I agree with that.
So this was, and I enjoyed both those shows up until, where they got nearly to the point where they were supposed to explain stuff. I love the ending of Watchmen, and I think that, it's like, to me, it's the first time that he paid off on something without... No, I mean, the trouble with Lost was that Lost became a phenomenon, and I think they cheated because they kept denying, because people were guessing what it was. And
sure.
Rather than, I mean, the double-edged sword of social media really is that the company wanted message boards to be chewing over the stuff, but at the same time, you can't do that and not be honest with the audience. And I think there were too many instances where they said, no, that's not it. It's not going to be what you're thinking. That's not it. That's not it. And then when they ended it, it was like, well, that's what we were all thinking. But it's kind of less because you kept saying and making us expect some kind of Hail Mary pass or something. That's the problem. So with Watchmen, they started with a premise that is a really good and a valid updating of what Watchmen was. Watchmen came about in the 80s when we were all worried about, I mean, I guarantee you, I lived through this era. We elect Ronald Reagan. It's the old guy with his finger on the nuclear button or whatever.
I thought I was going to be drafted. I thought for sure I was going to be drafted.
I mean, all that stuff was viably in the air.
Yes.
And the no nukes. I mean, all the wave of protests against nuclearization and all this stuff. All those generally all the good treaties that came out because of public sentiment and protest over proliferation of nuclear, weapons and stuff. So It exists in that era. And our era, we're back in this polarizing 60s thing where we have, people who are happy to be identified as, Nazis, So it's certainly a valid take in the time frame. Here's the major concern of the day. And it truly is, I think just clearly targeted to that. So, I mean, it lives in 2018 and whenever it finished, it lives in that time. And it's a good it doesn't make anything that the Alan Moore stuff or even the movie to be a lie necessarily. It all exists in that same universe, and it was in a very effective, I thought, update,
Sure.
I was disappointed. I kind of had a hint that he might not be doing more than one season because he made a comment after maybe the fourth or fifth episode that maybe I'm done with when I finish this. So that felt like, oh, okay, well, then it made me think of it being in a Fargo kind of way that each season would be a different take on it, and you get a different creator. And I still think that would be a viable thing if. I mean, I don't think Watchmen was a runaway hit, though. I mean, the numbers, a lot of people liked it, but the audience numbers weren't like Game of Thrones. If audience numbers...
Well, they certainly weren't that. I can appreciate that.
But I mean, they were like, they were drawing about 1.5 million viewers per week, which is okay. But for example, Ray Donovan was just canceled on Showtime, and Ray Donovan's numbers were better than that. So that's kind of a lower level for probably the amount of money they put into a show like Watchmen is probably a borderline. So, but I do think it would still be something to revisit, like they did with True Detective. Maybe you have Lindelof as an executive producer, and you have somebody else who pitches a great take for another aspect of it. I think that would be a viable, interesting way to continue it. Just don't.
I understand, and if a good creator has a great idea to move forward, and certainly I think things were left open enough that you could move forward. I mean, I still want to know what happened to Night Owl with Dan Dreiberg. I mean, that's hanging out there, and of course the way the show actually ends.
Yeah.
But God, no, I mean, the performances were fantastic, and no, I think again, yeah, I mean that's a high bar to overcome, and I think Lindelof did a great job, and I agree with you. It was his most satisfying ending of all of his creations.
Well, it's really tight. I mean, the whole thing is really tightly done, and what they set up in the first part makes sense and pays off.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it really, I felt like it really owned its era. You know, in the same way that what Alan and Dave Gibbons were trying to do in the original series, they were reflecting their era. You know, they were tilting at their own windmills. You know,
100%.
They had Maggie Thatcher and we had Ronald Reagan, and for better or worse, those things polarized people in the same way that, you know, I mean, I guess we live in interesting times, right?
Yeah, I know, and believe me, the only good thing out of it is I'm sure a lot of creative anxiety is turning into some really great scripts and projects.
There was like to me, I mean, the '80s is as much as the '70s was definitely my era. I didn't turn 20 until 1977, so the '70s are very part of my DNA, but the '80s are my era, and the '80s were funny because there were, you know, like not actors, music that I really liked from the 70s, well, like Don Henley and Glenn Frey, solo careers. They both made an impact in the 80s. Jackson Browne, people like that. There was a whole thing where these guys were actually fueled artistically by the Reagan era and the different changes in social programs, all this stuff. And
don't you think? No. All right. Now here's a good peer-to-peer kind of question, Jared. Don't you? I got to be honest though, and again, you're right about that. And 7 years behind you and everything. So those are my college years and my high school and college years and early post-college years as well. That whole decade. But that said, I got to be honest. There's a lot more, and especially from these big names that you're just mentioning, there's a lot more schlock than there was good.
Yeah.
From them. I mean, you got things like The End of the Innocents or Boys of Summer and some of those songs that I will stand by and say, no, those are great songs. Yeah. But, you know, you also got like All She Wants to Do Is Dance. Or, the one I pick on, and I always tell Franco, and you'll appreciate this, because he really liked that. I'm like, Who's Zooming Who by Aretha Franklin? Shame on her. I mean, Freeway of Love speaks for itself. But Who's Zooming Who? What is this shit? And he's like, I like that song. I'm like, well, then you're an idiot.
Well, she also did Pink Cadillac, so, you know.
Right, well, that's what I mean, man. No, that's
Springsteen
that's
hit.
Freeway of Love, Pink Cadillac. Or are you saying Bruce's Pink Cadillac?
Well, Bruce wrote the song, but she had a nice hit with that.
Oh, she did a cover of Pink Cadillac? Because I remember it being a line in "We're Going Riding on the Freeway of Love" in a Pink Cadillac.
No, she had a version of it that was a big hit.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, see, here's the thing, though. You know, people. I mean, I don't think I'm an easy critic for the most part. I like stuff, and I like a lot of stuff that's probably semi-generic. I'm sure I'm guilty, as like everybody is about that.
We all are.
But like with music, one thing that I was always, I mean, I like stuff that I always liked. In other words, I'm not going to suddenly go, well, I don't like this because it's 20 years later. I still like stuff. I mean, I'm a big Tom Petty fan. I'm a big...
I love Tom Petty's.
But there's amazing. A lot of stuff in the 80s. I like Dire Straits. I like a lot of these bands. I was a big Police fan when they first started. And the funny part, though, is I've always felt like my goal as an artist or a human being is not to freeze myself in any era. Sure. So I still buy, music from new artists and stuff. The only thing, honestly, I'm not a big rap fan, my only thing, and I've heard rap that I've liked, so I don't dislike everything, but it's not my thing, right? But I still buy music. I still buy even older artists doing new music, but I buy new bands and stuff. And I don't want to be the guy who's, pulling his pants up to his chest and saying, get off my lawn or whatever.
No.
And whenever anybody, I talk to plenty of people who are like, oh, it's terrible, this is terrible, that's terrible, whatever. And I say, you know what? You're kind of crapping on my kids who are in their 20s. You're crapping on their time. And
Right.
yeah, we thought things were bad in different times, and yeah, things can be bad, but everything wasn't better at any given time in the past.
Oh, no.
Nostalgia's
There's
great.
always been schlock.
You know, you can trade the convenience of a cell phone with being stuck on the side of the road with your car broken down or what have you. You know, there's as many good things that you can remember. There's plenty of terrific things. So you just need
Sure.
to, you need to kind of cultivate that and not totally blame, comics are terrible now. They're not. You know, maybe you're not the target audience, but there's still good stuff being produced. And even the stuff that you might not think is great, somebody likes it. You know, nobody sets out to do a bad comic or a bad movie or what have you. You know, so you really you can't let your brain get fixed in any era that you might have been your golden age or what have you. Some people,
Sure.
it's high school. You know, they're a big sports fan, and again, Springsteen with Glory Days that illustrates that
Absolutely.
really clearly.
Oh,
But-
good Lord, yes. No, that's that song. I always point that out when I run into an old high school person that is really still stuck in the past. No, you're right about that. And also, I was going to say the same thing, that for that golden period of anybody, it's that, teen to 30 period,
Yeah.
where your tastes are expanding and you're really starting to cultivate those things. No, I understand. G4 used to have that great segment on Attack of the Show, though, called Your Childhood Sucks. And then they would show like a commercial for a ridiculous toy or
Right.
a bad movie or whatever. But no, I completely agree with you. And I try too to stay, find new bands and get excited about, new music and stuff. Traditional media doesn't help because they've homogenized things to just really the hits.
Yeah.
And the experimentation that you used to get, even in my own circles, in radio and stuff. And again, thank God for online media, because that's where the game's going.
But see, even like if you have a history with radio, when I was maybe a teenager, FM radio started becoming big, and FM was clearly not top 40. And then at some point I would say even it was in the 80s, that FM stations suddenly became kind of no better than top 40s. They were kind of like the MTV channels, and they stopped playing album cuts, and they stopped giving you stuff that wasn't. So, you're right. It's like things, but again, that's marketing, and that's the same thing of
course it is.
You want to maximize something to get the most people to buy something or whatever, and you don't really maybe shine a light on other stuff that's really well done or worthy of it because you're selling this. We're just selling hot dogs this week. No one's going to.
Exactly.
You might be making some souffle over here. We don't give a crap about that. We're selling hot dogs.
Well, you're right, and I even think in the current comic environment, when it's big event after big event, and some people are like, I've been on this ride, they're not going to stay dead. It's like, well, of course not, but again, you're asking for a steak meal, and you're at the hot dog stand.
Right. And
and it's like,
and that's the one thing I get from fans at comic shows is, and I understand I'm a nostalgia act at this point, but I don't think of myself that way. I understand I am because I'm not on a regular book. Well, that's not something I have control over. So what I'm saying? It's like I feel like I've been put in the off to the side or whatever. But when fans come up to me and they're like, "Oh, things were great here, this and this," I understand the nostalgia for it, but I also feel kind of like, well, I've been doing stuff. Have you read any of these things that I've done over this period of time? I didn't stop working at the end of Power Shazam, or at the end of Superman or whatever. I think that's what I'd like to. I mean, I think that's the one thing that everybody needs to kind of fight, to shake their brain a little bit, because it is easy to fall into that, and that's kind of like basically like a negative path. You're like we started out where you really are succumbing to this drumbeat of negativity that is out there. I mean, social media, the first aspect of social media that really drew attention was stupid cat pictures or whatever.
Right.
But those were funny, right?
Sure.
Now we're overwhelmed with hate and politics, and here's what terrible thing is happening everywhere.
Yeah.
So I mean, you have to rise above that, or you have to curate it for yourself, and you have to say, acknowledge this is bad, that's bad, but it's not going to ruin my day. You know.
I hear you, man.
So you got you do have to to pull that little positive thing out. Otherwise, you might as well just. I mean, not to be. Why are you around if you don't like it? You know what I'm saying?
Right, if it's that bad. No, I understand.
You have to find the good in it, right? You got to find the good in it because there's good. Again, like I'm telling you, I go to the comic store every week. I ask different customers. I say, "What are you buying? What are you liking?" Sometimes that helps me find something, and I'll give that a chance.
Sure.
And just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not good. It's just my opinion. And there's a ton of opinions on the internet that you can read, but it's like, hey, even a movie reviewer. You read a movie reviewer. That was a good thing about the good old days when you had Gene Siskel at the Tribune or whatever. Every week I'd read his reviews, and if he didn't like something, I knew where he was coming from. So I could go, well, he didn't like this, but I really liked it. So here's where we differ. I'm going to like this movie. It wasn't like,
totally.
Absolutely, they're right.
I always point to, it's funny you mentioned Siskel, because I always point to Ebert, Roger Ebert, when he was at the Sun-Times, and there was a bad, I just know that I ended up seeing the movie a year later on Cinemax, and it was your classic high school R-rated with, boobs, Cinemax movie.
Right.
And the great thing was that Ebert gave it 3 stars, and he's like, look, I'm going to tell you right off the top, this is a TNA comedy set in school.
Right.
And he's like, but for being a TNA sex comedy in school, it's a well-made one.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm giving it a good review. And it's like, okay. He's like, there's actually a story here. It's actually funny.
And that movie was.
The kids are actually decent actors. I don't remember. I truly don't remember. I wish I could.
Porky.
Honestly. Right. But no, honestly, he's like, look, this is low rent, teenagers getting their jollies seeing this kind of movie and stuff. I'm sure it was set in college. Yeah. I'm sure everyone was over 18 in the movie. Don't worry, kids.
But I remember when...
Unlike, do you remember...
When
Sylvia Crystal... When Sylvia Crystal made Private Lessons...
Oh.
And it was about it was a scam. Right. Like, she was, hot, sexy housekeeper.
Right.
And they try to get the kid to, have sex with her. and then she's going to fake her death. And, get, they're going to get a ransom and everything.
Right.
The kid is, under 18.
Oh. Yeah, it is.
And also, when there are just scenes of the kid, the boy, with his friends, it's like an 80s Disney movie that's spliced onto a Cinemax.
Oh, wow.
And it's insanely I haven't seen it on cable or anything in almost 10 years, and it doesn't surprise me because people would be outraged at this. I mean, seriously, oh my God, it is every negative social more out there, and no. So yeah, and then again, this is I remember seeing it in high school in the 80s. So there's a TNA movie that I do vividly remember, and also
that's funny. Well, what about Weird Science? Remember that movie?
Sure.
And you think I love that movie. I don't remember it very well. I remember seeing it back then, but I think of whenever I see I'm watching other John Hughes movies or something, and I see that one pop up on an Internet Movie Database, I'm thinking oh yeah, that's got to be pretty politically incorrect nowadays.
That's a good question because you never see Kelly LeBrock nude.
Yeah.
There is. They have the scene where they're showering with her, and they could have been 18-year-old high school seniors. But by the way, Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
One of the bad guys in.
But it's the concept, I guess, is and there's really, here's the thing too, because people say, well, the politically correct, we can no longer like this stuff. It's like, no, you can still like it. You just have to understand that 20 years or 30 years later, aspects of these films will be looked upon differently. In other words, watching a movie I was even thinking about Working Girl or whatever. Working Girl had this kind of ethic about it and everything. That was, power struggles between people who were super competitive, and there's the girl who's the secretary and all. There's certain movies that have aged, and then you watch them and you go, wait, they were doing this in the 80s. What happened? Why are we still fighting some of these battles now when they felt like they had been won? Well, things go in waves, unfortunately.
Yep, human nature, unfortunately. Yeah, no, the pendulum swings back and forth.
And that's what we rebelled. Not me personally, but that's what the 60s rebellion was about. The 40s were, 30s were wide open. 40s were still kind of wide open fighting the war. The 50s, 50s was everybody trying to put the close Pandora's box, but you can't, So
Right.
the 60s are,
Yes.
and that happens. It seems to be like a cycle of depending on who's in office at the time or whatever. But
Yeah.
we shouldn't have to fight for women's rights anymore, because to me that felt like that battle had been won. And the same
Agreed.
is true with civil rights. Presumably, these things should just be won. You shouldn't have to 10 years later still have the same problems or have other stuff come up. But that's the good thing about, like I said, comics always had a conscience about that stuff, and they always felt forward thinking. Thanks mostly probably to the Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, and the young guys who were part of that era in the 70s.
Sure. Denny O'Neil.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
Neil, certainly.
Yeah. People who had a social consciousness doesn't have to. Again, it doesn't have to be politics. It's almost just like good human nature.
Agreed.
But
no, absolutely, man.
Yeah,
well, I'll tell you what, we should wrap because. But
you'll have like a marathon.
2.5 hours.
You'll have the Ben.
No, that was great.
You'll have the Ben Hur of podcasts.
No, please. This is nothing. Well, first of all, Marty Pasco and I will go 4 hours without blinking. So this is a teacup compared to that. And Bendis and I usually go 2.5 hours or so. So you're in good company, man. Don't kid yourself. And no, that was great. Truly, I love. It's so funny, as you know. You texted me before, and you're like, "Are we just going to wing it?" I'm like, "Yeah, pretty much." I wanted to hit. The fact that you did the Crisis covers, and then the fact that Batman 89, I meant to talk to you last year before the year was up for Batman 89, but then this is great to know that, and again, give the title for the Marvel's spin-off thing that you did with Alan Brennan.
Marvel's Snapshot, #1, Submariner.
Outstanding, and in just a couple weeks.
Kurt Busiek is the kind of not de facto editor, but he's curating it, and Alan Brennan, who, again, wrote tons of great. Mostly, I remember Brave and Bold and all the really cool DC stuff back in the 70s, but he's been pretty active in TV and stuff. He wrote it, and I pencil inked it, and I honestly, I feel bad. I can't remember the colorist's name, but he did a retro color job, which is kind of interesting, too. I wasn't expecting it, but it looks like an 1840s comic.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, and again, I loved last year's one shot with Roy on Captain America and the Invaders. So, no, it's great, and that's terrific. And anything else coming up? Well, you said you got the P. Craig Russell Sandman adaptation coming.
Or the Neil Gaiman Norse mythology. I think that comes out.
Oh, that's what I meant. Excuse me.
That comes out.
That is what I meant.
I think that comes out in May, or it starts coming out. I think it's a monthly. I don't know how many issues, but I'm doing like half of part of the first issue, and then I think a big chunk of the second one for my little chapter of Loki and the dwarves. But it's fun stuff. It's definitely, and if you've ever read any of those, like the Norse mythology book that Gaiman did, is just really it's not an intense read. It's very fun. I mean, he basically did a lot of research and kind of came up with his, not his own version, but he did a nice job with it. So it's little parables of Asgardian stuff, which should appeal to comic fans since everybody loves Thor, and got Walt Simonson doing Ragnarok and all that. So it's in that wheelhouse.
Sure. Oh no, absolutely. No, and isn't it interesting? I think awareness of Norse mythology has only grown.
Yeah.
And not so much from the Marvel Thor movies, I guess to a degree where maybe people are more interested in stuff. But yeah, it's I'm thrilled that Walt's doing Ragnarok over at IDW.
Yeah. And that's a great
Neil
book.
Did this book.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. But it's great that Neil did this book and that you and Craig are adapting and everything.
Yep.
That's terrific. Very cool, man.
Thank you.
Hey, always great fun, and I know I'll see you in a couple months at Terrificon.
Okay, well, hopefully you're doing well health-wise. You're good.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, buddy. Yeah, actually, I am back in normal shoes.
Excellent.
After all the, you saw me in the boot. That's true. You saw me in the big boot.
Well, do you have those bronze? Like when you're,
I
baby
still have
shoes.
them. I don't know. I know. You know what's sad? You know what I am hanging on to? Because well, I have older family members as well. But I was given a walker, and I did need a walker for the first couple of weeks, and I do have it there.
Oh wow!
And I'm just like, somebody in the family might need this. It's a good walker.
Well, it's a reminder. Yeah, right? I mean,
it is a reminder.
Time moves on, and it's a reminder. It's like, wow, I got past that. That's actually pretty good.
This is true.
Take that.
No, but thanks for asking. That's nice. No, I appreciate it.
Okay.
But, yeah, man, no, it's always fun talking, and we'll do it again.
Okay, John.
There you go. Jerry Ordway for the couple hours. It's always great to talk to him. I never mentioned his Power Cosmic podcast that he does with Mitch Halleck, my buddy who runs Terrificon and a good business associate that I've been doing a lot of work with over the years. And Jerry does a great job on that podcast as well. So if you like what you heard here, you may want to check out the Power Cosmic. They always have great, intense conversations, just like I've had individually with Jerry and Mitch over the years as well. I hope you enjoyed today's Word Balloon. It was all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Again, thank you, League, for your wonderful support via Patreon. Is Word Balloon worth $1 a month to you? Is it worth the price of a comic book a month to you? If you think so, if you can swing it and want to help out the cause, you can subscribe to Word Balloon via Patreon. And I greatly appreciate the hundreds of strong League of Word Balloon listeners, your domino mask and cape await for you to join the cause. Patreon.com/wordballoon or click on the Patreon ad on the front page of wordballoon.com. But thank you greatly, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon also brought to you by Aftershock Comics, shaking things up at your local shop right now. Great new titles like Stephanie Phillips' Artemis and the Assassins coming later this month. And also we enjoyed last month's John Layman's The Man Who Effed Up Time, along with Zach Thompson's Undone by Blood and God Killers from Mike Sable to go along with some of your other great favorites like Donnie Cates's and Gary Brown's Baby Teeth, and A Walk Through Hell from Garth Ennis and Gordon Suzuka, and of course Marguerite Bennett and Raphael De La Tour with The Great Animosity. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview art pages, and the way to get these books either digitally or the diamond codes to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon today, and thank you for your attention as always. More great conversations on the way for the month of March. Some newcomers and some old favorites as well, just like Jerry Ordway today. Our other Word Balloon that we dropped today was a discussion about how the coronavirus is impacting nerd cons across the country, whether it's South by Southwest, Emerald City, or unfortunately Ithacon. We talked to my buddy Ed Cato, who is one of the organizers behind Ithacon, and it was going to be a great one again this year. In fact, they were celebrating their 45th anniversary this year with Ithacon. They're not sure if they're going to fully cancel it or postpone it, but for now it's just postponed. And he talks about that, but also some really neat projects that he is working on. Things like a really neat collection of Golden Age and Silver Age pirate stories from some of the classic creators. Wally Wood, Frank Frazetta, Will Eisner, Reed Crandall, just to name a few. And it's a really fun conversation that unfortunately starts with the frustration of the status quo right now of the world pandemic that is coronavirus, but it gets happier. So I think you might be finding another interesting conversation to listen to that dropped today on Word Balloon. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2020.